Chapter 115. Big brother, third brother, are you really not going to stay? Even though she knew it was impossible, Longqing still could not help but ask. Hearing Longqing's words, Qianling smiled and said, "Second sister, you will be able to obtain the best cultivation environment if you stay in the country of Yao beasts. However, third brother and I are different. There is no point in us staying in the country of Yao beasts. Work hard on your cultivation. Trust me, it won't be long before we three siblings meet again." As mentioned before, Qianling and Xiaochen would not be staying in the country of Yao beasts. The cultivation methods of Yao beasts and humans were different. Even the three great beast emperors could only provide limited help to Xiaochen and Qianling. Hearing Qianling's words, Longqing nodded slightly. Then, Xiaochen waved to Longqing and said, "Let's go, second sister. If you ever come to the Divine Central Region, come find me at 9 Firmaments Palace." After bidding farewell to Longqing, the two of them left the All-Beast mountain range and officially set foot on the Divine Central Region. They had already planned to head to 9 Firmaments Palace. After all, Qin Shuru was still waiting for them there. The first time they came to the Divine Central Region, they found a small town outside the All-Beast mountain range. It had been a long time since they had eaten human food and wine. After finding a restaurant, Xiaochen and Qianling ordered a few dishes and a jug of wine and began eating. "Big brother, why don't you come with me to 9 Firmaments Palace?" Xiaochen said as he drank. Qianling had not mentioned where he wanted to go. Now, Xiaochen had taken the initiative to invite him. Qianling smiled in response to Xiaochen's invitation. "I'm not going, third brother. Going to 9 Firmaments Palace is not beneficial to me. You know that." He had no intention of going to 9 Firmaments Palace. Moreover, from Qianling's words, it seemed that he was not planning on joining any forces. As Qianling, he was the reincarnation of an ancient almighty. He did not need anyone to guide him. For him, cultivation was very simple. Moreover, in his memories, he had all sorts of superb martial skills. There was no need for him to head to those great forces to cultivate. Qianling had no intention of going to 9 Firmaments Palace with him. After saying that, Qianling paused for a moment before continuing. "Third brother, you can say that my future has already been set. With the memories of my previous life, I only need to cultivate step by step. But you are different. You are like a blank piece of paper now. Your future has unlimited possibilities. Third brother, your talent is the strongest I've ever seen in my life. Even though I've seen countless geniuses in the past, very few could compare to you. Originally, I was wondering if I should bring you along with me. However, after thinking about it, I gave up on that idea. All my life, I have only loved the Tao of Blades. I do not have much involvement in the Tao of Swords. Although you might have an advantage in terms of cultivation if you follow me, you will be greatly restricted in other aspects. Throwing away a watermelon for a sesame seed is not worth it. So, I decided that instead of having you follow me, it would be better for you to explore on your own. Everyone's path is different. You have just stepped onto the path of martial arts. Exploring on your own and witnessing the vastness of martial arts is more beneficial for you. Moreover, I firmly believe that only in this way, after experiencing your own trials, will you be able to shine with your own brilliance in the future." Qianling had originally thought of bringing Xiaochen along with him so that he could guide Xiaochen's cultivation. However, this idea had now been rejected by Qianling. Although it was too easy for Qianling to guide Xiaochen's cultivation with his previous life's cultivation, was this really a good thing for Xiaochen? After spending this period of time together, Qianling had fully witnessed Xiaochen's talent. It was precisely because he understood Xiaochen's talent that Qianling actually felt that he could not teach Xiaochen. Not only would it not benefit Xiaochen if he tied Xiaochen to his side, it might even hinder his future development. In Qianling's opinion, Xiaochen was a piece of unpolished jade. Moreover, this piece of unpolished jade had yet to reveal its true potential. Only after undergoing countless trials and tribulations, this piece of unpolished jade like Xiaochen would truly stand proudly in the world. In Qinling's heart, although he had never said it out loud, his intuition told him that among the three siblings, Xiao Chen's future accomplishments would likely far surpass his and Long Qing's. This was because, from a certain perspective, his and Long Qing's futures were basically destined. He was the reincarnation of an ancient supreme existence, while Long Qing was a member of the Dragon Clan. Although their future accomplishments would be very high, there would still be a limit. However, Xiao Chen was different. His future was limitless. Thus, Qinling was willing and hoped that Xiao Chen would be able to forge his own path. Of course, at the same time, he and Long Qing would always stand behind Xiao Chen and support him. After all, they were Xiao Chen's big brother and second sister. He did not plan on following Xiao Chen to Nine Firmaments Palace. At the same time, he did not plan on having Xiao Chen by his side. Hearing Qinling's words, Xiao Chen knew what he meant. He nodded his head and did not say anything else. After the meal, it was already night. Qinling suggested that the two of them stay in town for the night. Xiao Chen did not refuse. After a night of silence, early the next morning, Xiao Chen had to rush to Nine Firmaments Palace. Qinling obviously had his own plans. The two of them planned to part ways here. Outside the town, the two brothers each led a dragon horse and bid farewell to each other. Before they parted, Qinling suddenly said, "Third brother, I have never had anything good to give you. Moreover, I am not too deeply involved in the way of the sword. There is not much I can give you. I only have one sword technique here. I will give it to you. Relax your mind and do not resist it." Before leaving, Qinling was prepared to pass on the only sword technique in his memory to Xiao Chen. The two of them connected their minds and a huge amount of information quickly flowed into Xiao Chen's mind. After a full 10 breaths, the two of them stopped. Then, a strange expression appeared on Xiao Chen's face. The martial technique that Qinling passed on to him was called the Nine Heaven Sword Finger. Qinling did not know the specific realm. It was something that he had obtained by chance in an ancient ruin in his previous life. However, according to the records, the Nine Heaven Sword Finger had a total of 9 fingers. The first finger was equivalent to a normal martial technique. The second finger was equivalent to a Xian martial technique. The third finger was equivalent to an earth martial technique. The fourth finger had reached the terrifying heaven martial technique. It was definitely a heaven-defying martial technique. Just the fourth finger was already a heaven-level martial technique. Then, what about the fifth finger? The sixth finger? And the ninth finger? What kind of terrifying level would it reach? It was definitely giving Xiao Chen a huge treasure. Regarding this, Qinling did not even frown. In his opinion, no heaven-defying treasure could compare to the feelings between the three of them. Knowing that the Nine Heaven Sword Finger would be of great help to Xiao Chen, Qinling smiled and mounted his horse. Then, he laughed loudly and said, "Let's go, third brother. You have to cultivate well. The next time we meet, don't let me and second sister leave you behind too much." After saying that, he clamped his legs on the horse's belly and left. Please collect, recommend, reward. Chapter 116. Qinling left in a very carefree manner. He left behind a peerless opportunity like the Ninth Heaven Sword Finger to Xiao Chen before leaving. Watching Qinling leave, Xiao Chen shouted with a smile, "Don't worry, the next time we meet, I will not be left behind by big brother and second sister." Xiao Chen's words did not receive a response, but Qinling, who was far away, had a smile on his face. At this point, the three siblings had gone their separate ways, each of them searching for their own path of martial arts. Although they had separated, their hearts were still tightly connected. Seeing Qinling disappear from sight, Xiao Chen mounted his horse and rushed towards Nine Firmaments Palace. The entire Divine Central region was very large, occupying over 60% of the heavenly Qin mainland. Moreover, due to the existence of the 7 great overlords, although there were many sects and families within the Divine Central region, it was still divided into 7 prefectures. The division of the 7 prefectures was based on the 7 great overlords. Each of the 7 great overlords ruled over a prefecture. Shaochen was currently in the Heavenly Pill Prefecture, where the Heavenly Dan Valley was established by the Heavenly Pill ruler. As one of the 7 great overlords, the Heavenly Pill ruler was known as the #1 alchemist in the Heavenly Qin mainland. At the same time, the Heavenly Dan Valley that he established was also a place that all alchemists in the Heavenly Qin mainland yearned for. Over 70% of the alchemists in the entire continent came from the Heavenly Dan Valley. It could be said that the Heavenly Dan Valley controlled all of the alchemists in the Heavenly Qin mainland. However, the Heavenly Dan Valley rarely participated in the struggle, as if it was detached from the world. Because of this, in their identity as alchemists, the Heavenly Dan Valley was very popular in the Heavenly Qin mainland. It had close cooperation with the other 6 great overlords. Thinking about it, which cultivator could live without medicinal pills? Due to the existence of the Heavenly Dan Valley, the number of alchemists in the Heavenly Pill Prefecture was the highest. Within the Heavenly Pill Prefecture's territory, almost every city had an Earth-tier alchemist. Alchemists were divided into alchemy apprentices, mortal-level alchemists, black-level alchemists, earth-level alchemists, and sky-level alchemists. In the Eastern Sun region, Earth-grade alchemists were rare. However, in the Heavenly Pill Prefecture, almost every city had an Earth-grade alchemist. From this, one could see the difference between the two. They rushed towards 9 Firmaments Palace's residence, 9 Firmaments Palace. However, due to the long distance, Shaochen had no choice but to rest while making his way there. Half a month later, Shaochen still had not left the territory of the Heavenly Elixir Prefecture. There was nothing he could do about it, as the central divine realm was just too big. One day, Shaochen arrived at a city called the City of the Apothecary King. Originally, Shaochen planned to rest here for the night before leaving. However, during dinner, he heard 2 pieces of news that interested him. The first was about the movements of the Heavenly Prides in the Heavenly Qin mainland. It had been several months since he entered the Myriad Beast mountain range. During this period of time, many changes had occurred in the Heavenly Qin mainland, especially regarding the Heavenly Prides. It was known as a golden age that was hard to come by in 10,000 years. Under this golden age, the Heavenly Qin mainland produced many Heavenly Prides and monsters. However, it was obvious that the world had underestimated the arrival of this golden age. After Shaochen and the other Heavenly Prides appeared, more and more Heavenly Prides appeared in the Heavenly Qin mainland. In just a few months, the number of recognized Heavenly Prides in the Heavenly Qin mainland had reached over 100. What kind of concept was this? Although the Heavenly Qin mainland had a population of over 100 billion, Heavenly Prides were not cabbages that could be found everywhere. In other dynasties, it was already considered good to have a few Heavenly Prides. However, there were now over 100 Heavenly Prides. It was precisely because of the appearance of so many Heavenly Prides that the world called this era the era of Heavenly Prides. This was because only Heavenly Prides could stir up a storm in this era. The era of Heavenly Prides was both fortunate and unfortunate, especially for those geniuses. Perhaps they were very talented, but it was a pity that they were born in the era of Heavenly Prides. This caused them to be destined to be unknown. Following the appearance of new Heavenly Prides, the 7 overlords also jointly released a Heavenly Prides list. The list listed the life stories of the 100 Heavenly Prides, as well as an analysis and ranking based on their battle records. The Heavenly Prides list, which was jointly released by the 7 overlords, attracted the attention of the world the moment it was released. Of course, Shaochen was not on the list because everyone thought that Shaochen had died in the Myriad Beast mountain range. At the same time, within a few months, the Heavenly Prides of the 4 major domains had arrived in the Central Divine region and joined the 7 overlords. It was worth mentioning that Gulei and Sumu of the 4 major domains had just arrived in the Central Divine region when they were challenged by the top Heavenly Prides of the Central Divine region. The top Heavenly Prides challenged the 10 Great Prides, but the results were unacceptable. Gulei and Sumu were both defeated by the top Heavenly Prides of the Central Divine region. Because of this, many people naturally felt that the 4 major domains' prides were too weak. In terms of strength, they were not as strong as the top Heavenly Prides of the Central Divine region. Fortunately, after Huanggu accepted the challenge from the top heavenly prides of the central divine region, he won and saved some face for the 4 major domains prides. Even so, Gulei and Sumu's defeat was a fact. As a result, the heavenly prides of the central divine region looked down on the heavenly prides of the other 4 major domains even more. If even the king of prides was defeated, how strong could the other heavenly prides be? The above was related to the movements of the heavenly Qin continent's heavenly prides in the past few months. The second news was that the number 1 family in the city of the Medicine King, the Yao family, would be holding the Medicine King's grand meeting 3 days later. When the time came, even the 7 overlords of the heavenly Dan Valley would send people to participate. The fact that people from the 7 overlords would be participating naturally attracted the attention of countless other major powers. It could be said that when the news of the Yao King's grand meeting was released, many people from the major powers had already rushed to the city of the Medicine King's grand meeting. That was because, in the Medicine King's grand meeting, one could buy many medicinal pills that were rarely seen in the market. There were even rumors that heaven-tier medicinal pills might appear in this Medicine King's grand meeting. The Medicine King's grand meeting was very attractive. Of course, Xiaochen didn't care about that. What Xiaochen cared about was this Medicine King's grand meeting. It was said that the people from 9 Firmaments Palace's Heavenly Sword Peak would also be participating in this Medicine King's grand meeting. As the Heavenly Sword Peak of 9 Firmaments Palace, this matter had naturally caused a great commotion in the central divine region. Additionally, it was said that a Peak Lord from Heavenly Sword Peak would be leading the team to participate in this Medicine King's grand meeting. Unexpectedly, even Heavenly Sword Peak would be participating in this Medicine King's grand meeting. As he drank, Xiaochen thought to himself, "I wonder who will be leading the team. Will it be Master or Senior Uncle? What about Senior Uncle? If so, all I need to do is to wait in the city of the Medicine King. When the time comes, I will return to Heavenly Sword Peak with them. Begging for collection, begging for recommendation, begging for reward." Chapter 117. Since the people from the Sky Sword Peak were also coming to participate in the Medicine King's grand meeting, Xiaochen did not need to go to the 9 Firmaments Palace alone. He only needed to wait for the people from the Sky Sword Peak to arrive and return with them. After hearing these 2 pieces of news by chance, Xiaochen decided to wait for 3 days in the city of the Medicine King's grand meeting. On one hand, he wanted to see what was so special about the Medicine King's grand meeting. On the other hand, he wanted to meet up with the people from the Sky Sword Peak. After disappearing for so long, Qin Shuru and his master must be worried sick. As a big city in the Heavenly Pill Prefecture, the number of alchemists in the city of the Medicine King was indeed high. Moreover, the city of the Medicine King was the territory of the Yao family, and the Yao family old ancestor was a heaven-grade alchemist. Moreover, he was also a main elder of the Heavenly Dan Valley. Thus, the city of the Medicine King's reputation was resounding throughout the entire central divine region. Since he had nothing to do, Xiaochen decided to take a stroll in the city of the King of Medicine. As a city where alchemists gathered, there was no lack of pharmacies in the city of the King of Medicine. Some herbs and pills that were hard to find in the outside world could be found in the city of the King of Medicine. Of course, the prices were also very expensive. After visiting more than 10 medicine shops, Xiaochen also bought many medicinal pills for his cultivation. In just 4 to 6 hours, Xiaochen had spent nearly 50,000 low-grade spirit stones. These spirit stones were given to him by Long Qing before he left. It was a total of 100,000 low-grade spirit stones. Of course, these spirit stones were also obtained from the kingdom of demonic beasts. He had no concept of spirit stones. For Xiaochen, spirit stones were just decorations if he did not spend them. Only by transforming these resources into strength would he be able to make the best use of them. After a round of shopping, Xiaochen found an inn to stay in. He cultivated while waiting for the Medicine King's grand meeting to begin. 3 days passed quickly. In the blink of an eye, only 1 day was left. On this day, the people from the major forces arrived at the city of the Medicine King one after another. Some of the ordinary forces naturally could not receive the hospitality of the Yao family. They could only find inns to stay in. As for the 7 overlords, the Yao family naturally treated them as distinguished guests. Along with the other forces, the people from the Sky Sword Peak rode a golden-winged rock and arrived at the city of the Medicine King at noon. Song Wang led the group. In addition, there were 8 Sky Sword Peak disciples accompanying him. When the Sky Sword Peak's people arrived, they were naturally invited into the Yao family. At the same time, the Sky Sword Peak's people also came with the Baijian Peak's people. Their leader was a Baijian Peak elder, whose cultivation was much higher than Song Wang's. Only the 2 peaks from 9 Firmaments Palace had arrived. As the first of the 7 great overlords to arrive, the Yao family's family head, Yao Ming, and the Yao family's young master, Yao Changqing, personally appeared to welcome them. As the patriarch of the Yao family, Yao Ming's cultivation was at the great circle of the Dao Gate realm. As for Yao Changqing, as the young patriarch of the Yao family, he was also a top-notch genius. He was only 20 years old and had already reached the profound Eon stage. The father and son appeared together. Yao Ming first bowed to the elder leading the Baijian Peak. "Elder Hong, you have worked hard." Elder Hong's name was Hong Gang. He was at the minor success stage of the Dao transformation realm. Although Song Wang had successfully broken through to the Dao transformation realm in the past few months, there was still a big gap between him and Hong Gang. Yao Ming's attitude towards Hong Gang was very respectful. At the same time, Yao Changqing came before a female disciple of the Baijian Peak with a smile on his face. Junior sister Elian. Facing Elian, Yao Changqing's eyes flashed with infatuation. The two of them naturally knew each other. Also, Elian was the same as Yao Changqing. She was also a peak-level genius and had been pursuing Elian for a very long time. However, Elian didn't seem to be interested in Yao Changqing. Elian's beautiful face. Facing Yao Changqing's greeting, Elian only nodded slightly and did not say anything. Her attitude towards Yao Changqing was very cold. Seeing this, Yao Changqing laughed helplessly and then turned his gaze to the people from the Sky Sword Peak. Compared to the Baijian Peak, the lineup of the Sky Sword Peak was somewhat lacking. Putting aside Song Wang's cultivation, there was not a single genius among the disciples of the Sky Sword Peak. Not even the most ordinary of top geniuses were there. Originally, the Sky Sword Peak had a king of geniuses, Xiaochen. However, it was rumored that Xiaochen had fallen in the Myriad Beast Mountain range. Therefore, the Sky Sword Peak had no geniuses to hold down the fort. Moreover, the most laughable thing was that as more and more geniuses appeared, the various major forces were fighting for the geniuses to join them. Take the 9 peaks of the 9 Firmaments Palace for example. In just a few months, the other 8 peaks had geniuses joining them. Moreover, there was more than one. Only the Sky Sword Peak did not have a single genius joining them after several months after Xiaochen's fall. Not a single genius was willing to join the Sky Sword Peak. Additionally, the Sky Sword Peak had only just been established. Its foundation and strength were too weak. The 3 peak lords were only at the Dao Gate stage. They were not even comparable to the elders of the other peaks. Due to this, the Sky Sword Peak had become a laughingstock in 9 Firmaments Palace. Song Wang and the other 2 were both furious and helpless in the face of this situation. Having no geniuses brought about a huge problem. When they went out to participate in activities with other forces, none of the disciples of the Sky Sword Peak could be brought out. After all, this was the era of geniuses. Without geniuses, one would naturally have no right to speak. It was as though they had returned to the time when they were in the East Sword Pavilion. This was not the first time. Song Wang fantasized. If Xiaochen was still alive and in the Sky Sword Peak, what would the Sky Sword Peak be like now? He did not dare to say anything else, but at least 1 or 2 geniuses would choose to join the Sky Sword Peak because of Xiaochen. Unfortunately, Xiaochen had already fallen. Yao Changqing's eyes were filled with obvious contempt. His attitude was also a lot more indifferent. He bowed to Song Wang and said indifferently, "Peak Lord Song Wang, the accommodations have been prepared. Everyone, please take a rest. The Yao family had prepared a banquet for the Baijian Peak. However, the Yao family had chosen to ignore the Sky Sword Peak. Up until now, the Yao family head, Yao Ming, had not even greeted San Wang. With regards to the Yao family's actions, no one from the Baijian Peak stood up for the Sky Sword Peak. Elder Hong just casually bowed to San Wang and then left with Yao Ming. As for the people from the Sky Sword Peak, they were led to their accommodations by a servant of the Yao family. Naked contempt. No, this was already ignoring. Faced with such treatment, the 8 Sky Sword Peak disciples who followed San Wang all had ugly expressions on their faces. One of them even opened his mouth to speak. Humph, snobs. Isn't it just 2 top geniuses? If Senior Xiaochen was still here, let's see if they would still dare to treat us like this. Please collect, recommend, reward. Chapter 118. At that moment, all the disciples remembered Xiaochen. When Xiaochen had been there, the Eastern Sword Pavilion had been majestic. Xiaochen had relied on his own strength to oppress the other 4 hidden dragons of the Dongyang region. Sigh, that's right. If senior brother Xiaochen was still alive, our Sky Sword Peak wouldn't have fallen to such a state. Another disciple sighed softly after hearing the disciple's words. The news that Xiaochen had died in the 10,000 Beasts mountain range was a huge blow to the Tianjian Peak. To put it bluntly, Xiaochen represented hope for the Tianjian Peak. He represented the hope that the Tianjian Peak could return to its former glory and be on par with the other 8 peaks. However, the hope of everyone had fallen in the 10,000 Beast mountain range. The disciples sighed. San Wang, who was walking in front, was the same. They believed that as long as Xiaochen was there, he would definitely be able to lead the Heavenly Sword Peak to glory, just like when they were in the Dongyang domain. Xiaochen had appeared out of nowhere and suppressed the 4 great hidden dragons. He had used his own strength to suppress the 4 great hidden dragons. If Xiaochen could do it in the Eastern Sun domain, San Wang believed that Xiaochen could do it in the Central Divine Realm as well. After all, Xiaochen was known as the only person who could be on par with Guduya a few months ago. Now, Guduya was recognized as the #1 king of pride in the Tianshan continent. San Wang sighed silently. If he had known earlier, he wouldn't have allowed Xiaochen to go to the 10,000 Beasts mountain range. The Yao family had arranged for the Tianjian Peak to stay in a remote courtyard. As one of the 7 overlords, the Yao family had arranged for the Tianjian Peak to stay in a remote courtyard. Nobody came to visit them and nobody paid any attention to them. It seemed like the Tianjian Peak had been forgotten. As time passed, the other 7 overlords arrived one after another. The ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds was from the 9 clouds palace, the ruler of Mu Tian was from the Mu clan, the ruler of 10,000 weapons was from the 10,000 weapons pavilion, the ruler of Burning Sky was from the Burning Sky sect, the ruler of Heavenly Pellet was from the Heavenly Dan Valley, the ruler of Divine Talisman was from the Divine Talisman sect, and the ruler of Divination was from the Divination Hall. That night, the Yao family could be said to be a boiling cauldron of voices as they held an unprecedented grand gathering. Even the Yao family old ancestors showed up to participate in this gathering. The experts of the 7 overlords also gathered together. At the same time, for this gathering, each of them brought along their respective heaven's prides. Although they were basically all top-notch geniuses, the Mu clan had brought along a peerless genius named Mu Feng. There were more than 10 heaven's prides present. However, Mu Feng was the only peerless genius. As such, Mu Feng naturally became the focus of everyone's attention. According to the division of strength, the heavens prides were divided into 3 categories: top-notch heavens prides, peerless heavens prides and king of heavens prides. Top-notch heavens prides could only be considered as stepping into the dividing line of heavens prides. As for peerless heavens prides, they could be considered as the true heavens prides. As for king of heavens prides, that was the king that stood above all the other heavens prides. In the entire Heavenly Chen mainland, although many heavens prides had appeared, there were still only 10 king of heavens prides. Of course, the list of 10 king of heavens prides had also changed. For example, Goulet and Sumu had long since been kicked out of the list of 10 King of Heaven's prides. Additionally, due to the rumor that Xiaochen had fallen, he was also kicked out of the list of 10 King of Heaven's prides. With no King of Heaven's prides, Peerless Heaven's prides were undoubtedly the strongest. Thus, Mufeng became the leader of the many Heaven's prides present. The atmosphere was lively. However, no one invited the people from Sky Sword Peak. Even Baijian Peak, which was also part of Nine Firmaments Palace, did not invite the Sky Sword Peak. The banquet continued until late at night. During the banquet, no one thought about the Sky Sword Peak. Early the next morning, the Medicine King's grand meeting was held as scheduled. People from various major forces rushed towards the Yao family. The Medicine King's grand meeting was held at the Yao family's main square. As the overlord of the city of the Medicine King, the Yao family's mansion occupied a large area. Even if tens of thousands of people gathered together, it would not be crowded. At the Yao family's main square, a high platform had been built. The Yao family old ancestor, a group of Yao family's upper echelons and experts from the 7 overlord forces were seated on the high platform. Looking at the people on the high platform, the surrounding people quickly discovered a problem. There were no people from the Sky Sword Peak. Moreover, looking at the arrangement of the high platform, it seemed that the Yao family did not reserve a seat for the Sky Sword Peak. As one of the 9 peaks of the overlord forces, 9 Firmaments Palace, the Sky Sword Peak was not welcomed. They did not even have the qualifications to sit on the same level as the Yao family. This scene caused the crowd to discuss spiritedly. While the crowd was discussing, San Long finally brought the Sky Sword Peak disciples to the main square. As soon as they appeared, the surrounding people pointed at them and whispered. Seeing that there was no seat for the Sky Sword Peak on the high platform, San Long's face sank. At this time, Yao Ming also pretended to stand up and said, San Long Peak Master, I am really sorry. Due to the limited space, the Sky Sword Peak seat is really not available. I hope everyone from the Sky Sword Peak can understand. Of course, my Yao family will also compensate everyone from the Sky Sword Peak. Although it was an apology, there was no trace of guilt on his face. As for the compensation, when it came from Yao Ming's mouth, it was more like charity. Yao Ming did not give the Sky Sword Peak any face. Hearing this, everyone looked at San Long, wanting to see how San Long would respond. This was not giving any face at all. If San Long tolerated it, the Sky Sword Peak's face would be completely lost. In that case, my Sky Sword Peak will not participate in this Medicine King's conference. Under everyone's gaze, San Long coldly snorted. Since the Yao family humiliated the Sky Sword Peak in front of the major forces, San Long naturally would not choose to tolerate it. However, just as San Long's voice fell, the peerless genius of the Mu family, Mu Feng, suddenly spoke. His words were full of contempt. You speak as if we are begging you to participate. Although the Sky Sword Peak is one of the 9 peaks of the 9 Firmaments Palace, it is only in name. I will not talk about the strength of the 3 Peak Masters. I will only ask one question. Does your Sky Sword Peak have any geniuses? You don't even have a peerless genius, yet you still have the nerve to sit on the same level as us? What a joke! As a junior, Mu Feng's words were very unpleasant. Hearing this, San Long's face turned even gloomier. However, his strength was inferior, so he could not do anything to Mu Feng. After all, there was still a Dao transformation stage elder of the Mu family sitting beside Mu Feng. San Long was thoroughly humiliated, and the Sky Sword Peak didn't have any heaven's pride. Feeling the pitiful gazes of the surrounding people, San Long only wanted to leave as soon as possible. However, at this moment, a white-clothed man holding a crimson longsword walked in with large strides. The tip of the sword was pressed against the throat of a Yao family guard. His gaze landed directly on Mu Feng as he spoke in an indifferent tone. Is the mouth of the Mu family so foul? Mu Qing is like this, and so are you. A mere peerless genius dares to speak such arrogant words? It would be better if your Mu family's king of prides came. Chapter 119. Holding a 3-foot-long sword, he strode into the main courtyard. Hearing this, Mufeng's face sank. Do you want to die? The white-clothed young man was naturally Xiaochen. Today was the day of the Medicine King's conference, but who would have thought that an invitation was required to participate? Xiaochen did not have an invitation, so the guards outside did not allow him to enter. Left with no choice, Xiaochen could only fight his way in. Xiaochen had just arrived at the entrance of the main yard when he heard Mufeng insulting that Song dragon, which led to the current scene. Perhaps because they did not react in time, when they saw Xiaochen holding a Yao family guard and striding in, no one recognized Xiaochen's identity. Mufeng shouted coldly. Yao Changqing also shouted angrily. Who are you? How dare you trespass into my Yao family? You are simply lawless. Men, take him down, Mufeng and Yao Changqing shouted one after another. But at this time, Song Wang and the Sky Sword Peak disciples were stunned. They naturally recognized Xiaochen at a glance. They had always thought that Xiaochen had fallen in the Thousand Beast Mountain range. Now that they saw Xiaochen again, they naturally did not recover for a while. Only when Yao Changqing ordered people to take Xiaochen did Song Wang come back to his senses. Immediately, a terrifying aura rose from Song Wang's body. He took a step forward and instantly arrived beside Xiaochen. He looked at Yao Changqing on the high platform and shouted. You dare! Xiaochen was still alive, which made Song Wang very happy. At the same time, Yao Changqing's words instantly ignited Song Wang's anger. It was no exaggeration to say that in the eyes of Song Wang and the other two old men, anyone in the Sky Sword Peak could die except for Xiaochen. As long as Xiaochen was alive, the Sky Sword Peak would never fall. Therefore, at this time, when Yao Changqing ordered people to take Xiaochen down, how could Song Wang endure it? He was immediately enraged. Facing the furious Song Wang, Yao Changqing was slightly stunned. He thought to himself, is this old man crazy? He could endure the humiliation just now, but now he actually went crazy because of this kid. Yao Changqing, Yao Ming, if you dare to touch my Sky Sword Peak's King of Pride, my Sky Sword Peak will definitely annihilate your entire Yao family. Ignoring Yao Changqing's stunned expression, Song Wang directly looked at Yao Ming and shouted. Sky Sword Peak's King of Pride? Hearing Song Wang's words, Yao Changqing was even more puzzled. How could this Sky Sword Peak have a King of Pride? They didn't even have a peerless genius. Yao Changqing did not understand the meaning behind Song Wang's words. However, he soon thought of something and stared intently at Xiaochen. After a few breaths, Yao Changqing's expression changed drastically. He was not the only one. Many of the people present reacted the same way. Clearly, they had recognized Xiaochen's identity. Xiaochen's image had appeared in the sky when the sovereign had bestowed him with his name, and everyone had seen it. Xiaochen, many people recognized Xiaochen. They didn't expect the Sky Sword Peak's King of Pride to still be alive. Wasn't it rumored that Xiaochen had died in the 10,000 Beast Mountain range? How could he still be alive? Xiaochen's appearance shocked everyone. At the same time, it disgusted Mufeng and Yao Changqing, as if they had eaten a fly. Previously, they had said that the Sky Sword Peak was only a name, and did not have a peerless genius. But now, in the blink of an eye, the Sky Sword Peak had a King of Pride. Mufeng's expression was unsightly, but soon, he sneered. He looked at Xiaochen and pretended to be disdainful. Xiaochen, rumor has it that you died in the 10,000 Beast Mountain range. But even if you're not dead, so what? The King of Pride of the 4 great domains is only an appearance. Sumu and Gulei have already been kicked out of the top 10 King of Pride. Do you still think you're one of the top 10 King of Pride? Sumu and Gulei had been defeated by the peerless geniuses of the Central Divine Region. Mufeng's purpose in saying this was to show that Xiaochen was only an appearance, and that he did not deserve the title of King of Pride. Hearing Mufeng's words, Xiaochen calmly took a step forward. He first gave Song Wang a reassuring look, then looked at Mufeng and said indifferently. Alright, since that's the case, I, Xiaochen, will challenge all the geniuses present here in front of everyone. You can all come at me together. Xiaochen did not argue with Mufeng. He decided to use his strength to do the talking. As soon as these words came out, everyone went crazy. What was going on? Xiaochen wanted to challenge all the geniuses present, and they could all come at him together. This was simply crazy. One had to know that although everyone present was a peerless genius, and only Mufeng was a peerless genius, there were 14 of them. Even if Xiaochen was once the king of pride, wasn't this a little too arrogant? Moreover, Xiaochen was not challenging them one by one, but all at once. In other words, Xiaochen alone would have to fight more than 10 geniuses. No one had expected Xiaochen to say such a thing. Mufeng and Yao Changqing's expressions turned ugly, while the 8 disciples of the Sky Sword Peak were extremely excited. No one knew who took the lead, but the 8 of them immediately shouted. Senior brother Xiaochen, senior brother Xiaochen, senior brother Xiaochen. Under the cheers of the Sky Sword Peak disciples, Xiaochen pointed the tip of his sword at the ground. He looked at Mufeng and said indifferently, "What, you don't dare? Didn't you just say that I'm only an appearance? Now that I've given you the chance, you don't dare to accept my challenge? Come on, all the geniuses present can attack. Today, I, Xiaochen, will sweep all of you away. My Sky Sword Peak doesn't have any geniuses, but we do have the King of Pride. Geniuses are just ants to my Sky Sword Peak." His words were filled with heroic spirit. One man and one sword, challenging all 14 geniuses present. However, in the face of Xiaochen's bold words, none of the 14 geniuses present dared to reply. They all chose to remain silent. Looking at the geniuses who chose to remain silent, the various major forces present couldn't help but whisper to each other. Sweeping all the geniuses. Among those of the same generation, I'm afraid only the 10 King of Pride has such a heroic spirit. Is this the King of Pride? He is indeed the King of Geniuses. As geniuses, they can only bow their heads in front of the King of Pride. The Sky Sword Peak, which had already lost all face today, turned the tide because of Xiaochen's appearance. Looking at Xiaochen's back, one man and one sword, sweeping all the geniuses, San Wang's turbid eyes turned slightly red. He's back. My Sky Sword Peak's King of Pride is back. Even if I'm facing a dozen geniuses, I'll sweep them away with one sword. This is the domineering aura of the Sky Sword Peak's King of Pride, Xiaochen. Just like when he was in the Eastern Sun region, one man and one sword, he suppressed the 4 great hidden dragons and the 4 great heads. Even San Wang was extremely excited, let alone the 8 Sky Sword Peak disciples. At this moment, their eyes were already brimming with tears. The sullenness of the past few months had vanished with Xiaochen's appearance. "Humph, who asked you to be so arrogant? Now that our Sky Sword Peak's King of Pride is here, why isn't anyone venting their anger? Didn't you just mock our Sky Sword Peak for not having any geniuses?" The 8 Sky Sword Peak disciples all had such thoughts as they stared at Xiaochen. Chapter 120. Xiaochen's overbearingness had exceeded everyone's expectations. Even the experts of the older generation on the high platform had not expected Xiaochen to be so overbearing. None of the Sky Prides responded to Xiaochen. Seeing that, Xiaochen pointed his sword at Mufeng and shouted, "Mufeng, do you dare to fight me?" With that shout, Xiaochen had effectively cut off Mufeng's path of retreat. If Mufeng did not dare to accept the challenge, he would become a laughingstock. He might even lose his title as a peerless genius. What was a genius? A genius? If one did not even have the courage to fight, what qualifications did one have to be called a genius? Hearing Xiaochen's words, Mufeng's face darkened to the extreme. Next, he exchanged glances with Yao Changqing, who was beside him. Mufeng then shouted, "Arrogant! Everyone, this Xiaochen is so arrogant. If we do not teach him a lesson today, how can we still be called geniuses? What a joke!" Mufeng's words sounded righteous. However, everyone knew that he did not have the courage to face Xiaochen alone. He wanted to drag all the other geniuses down with him. Understanding Mufeng's intentions, Xiaochen did not say anything about it. Instead, he simply smiled disdainfully. Under Mu Feng's instigation, the other geniuses began to speak up as well. After all, Xiaochen had included all of them in his words earlier. With the exception of Baijian Peak's Lian, the other 13 geniuses came to surround Xiaochen. The reason Lian did not take action was because both Baijian Peak and Heavenly Sword Peak were part of Nine Firmament's palace. Additionally, Lian also wanted to see just how extraordinary Xiaochen was. Her beautiful eyes were filled with curiosity as she looked at Xiaochen. Since Xiaochen's appearance, Lian's gaze had never left him. Xiaochen's handsome appearance and indifferent aura seemed to have a magical power that attracted Lian, making her involuntarily fall for him. Looking at the battle that was about to break out, Lian whispered softly, "Can we win?" He asked himself if Xiaochen could win if he was besieged by 13 geniuses at the same time. While Lian was paying attention to Xiaochen, Mu Feng shouted and the 13 Skyprides immediately attacked Xiaochen. They didn't have the confidence to fight him one-on-one. After all, Xiaochen was the only genius other than Gudu Wuya who had broken through the 9 heavens' divine thunder. Therefore, Xiaochen was naturally not an ordinary person. Even if he couldn't win one-on-one, they didn't believe that Xiaochen could win if it was 13 against 1. Even if he was once known as the Proud King, Xiaochen had disappeared for several months. Did he really have the strength of a proud king? After all, Sumu and Gulei had been forcefully kicked out of the Proud King list. The 13 Skyprides attacked at the same time. Seeing this, Xiaochen's expression remained unchanged. He immediately swept out with the Scarlet Cloud sword in his hand. Sword light flashed and instantly enveloped 3 of the Skyprides. Fast, extremely fast. In the past few months, Xiaochen's cultivation had not only broken through from the Arcane Ian initial success stage to the Arcane Ian small perfection stage, but his sword chi had also successfully reached the great perfection stage. He was only one step away from comprehending sword intent. With the addition of sword intent, the sword light whizzed past. Before it even came into contact, the Skyprides already felt a fatal threat. Without any hesitation, they all chose to dodge. And it was this dodge that happened to fall into Xiaochen's trap. He moved his feet and instantly used the clear shadow steps. His figure immediately rushed towards the Skyprides who were busy dodging. They were already busy dodging Xiaochen's sword chi. Now that they were faced with Xiaochen's sudden attack, their movements were in a mess. Unsurprisingly, they were quickly defeated by Xiaochen. However, he had already defeated 3 Skyprides at the beginning of the fight. Seeing this, many people couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. So strong, Xiaochen's strength was indeed very strong. Moreover, as the battle continued, Xiaochen's terrifying physical strength was on full display. The blood pill condensed from 3 drops of the Beast Emperor's blood essence had allowed Xiaochen's physical body to reach the limit of the Arcanian stage. Based on the strength of his physical body alone, Xiaochen could be considered a peerless Skypride. He was no weaker than those body-refining cultivators. Relying on his powerful physical body, Xiaochen was like a human-shaped Tyrannosaurus as he rampaged through the crowd. For some of the attacks that weren't fatal, Xiaochen didn't even bother dodging. He directly chose to exchange injury for injury. It was an extremely violent and direct way of fighting. Xiaochen dared to exchange injury for injury, but the Skyprides didn't. After all, they didn't have a physical body as strong as Xiaochen's. After an intense battle, the Skyprides became more and more alarmed as they fought. The same thought emerged in their minds. Is this the strength of the King of Pride? He's so strong. He's on a completely different level. His physical body? He's practically a monster in human form. After Xiaochen defeated 7 geniuses, the remaining geniuses all subconsciously chose to retreat. They did not dare to do it again. They really did not dare to do it again. They didn't have any grudges to begin with. Now that Xiaochen's combat strength was so strong, these Skyprides weren't fools. There was no need for them to bite the bullet and risk their lives against Xiaochen. Everyone chose to retreat. Xiaochen didn't chase after them. Only Mu Feng and Yao Changqing remained. Xiaochen didn't intend to let them go. Xiaochen took a step forward and arrived directly in front of Yao Changqing. He flicked the long sword in his hand, and the tip of the sword slashed across Yao Changqing's shoulder. Yao Changqing screamed as a wound opened up on his shoulder. Then, Xiaochen kicked out, and Yao Changqing was sent flying, crashing into the wall of the Yao family's main courtyard before coming to a stop. The Jiani kick had seriously injured Yao Changqing. After Yao Changqing was dealt with, only Mu Feng was left. As a peerless monster, Mu Feng's strength was naturally stronger than Yao Changqing's. But to Xiaochen, it didn't matter. No one dared to attack Xiaochen anymore. Only Mu Feng was left. Facing Xiaochen's attacks, Mu Feng was suffering. Xiaochen's sword was not only fast, but also terrifyingly powerful. He was completely at a disadvantage. He was completely suppressed by Xiaochen. In the end, as expected, Mu Feng was stabbed by Xiaochen's sword. Then, everyone only saw a flash of sword light. The scarlet edge sword was already at Mu Feng's neck. Just an inch more, and Xiaochen would be able to cut off Mu Feng's head. The aura of death completely enveloped Mu Feng's body. Xiaochen didn't kill him. After all, the Mu family's experts were still around. But today, the Sky Sword Peak's reputation had been ruined. Xiaochen wouldn't let Mu Feng go so easily. Xiaochen kicked Mu Feng in the knee. The excruciating pain caused Mu Feng to kneel before Xiaochen with both knees on the ground. Xiaochen looked down at Mu Feng from above and said with an indifferent expression, "You dare to insult my Sky Sword Peak? In front of me, you are no different from an ant. Do you understand? Remember, the next time your Mu family wants to insult my Sky Sword Peak, you better let the Mu family's King of Pride come personally. Trash like you is not enough." Chapter 121. You're not worthy. Ask your Mu family's King of Pride to come. Xiaochen's indifferent words echoed in Mu Feng's ears. Mu Feng's face was filled with anger. In the end, he spat out a mouthful of blood and fainted. It could be said that Mu Feng's reputation had been completely wiped out. Xiaochen looked at the unconscious Mu Feng and slowly sheathed the scarlet-edged sword. At the same time, the elder of the Mu clan on the high platform shouted coldly, "Humph, arrogant junior. You're courting death." The Mu family elder was at the Dao transformation stage, but Xiaochen did not show any fear. Instead, he said calmly, "What's wrong? Is the elder here after beating up the younger one?" Mu Feng's humiliation naturally represented the Mu family's humiliation, which was why the elder of the Mu family spoke up. Hearing Xiaochen's rebuttal, the elder of the Mu family's face became even more gloomy. A wave of minor perfection Dao transformation realm spiritual energy erupted from his body. His eyes narrowed slightly as he stared at Xiaochen and said word by word, "Xiaochen, do you know the consequences of angering the Mu family?" Xiaochen's humiliation to the Mu family had made the Mu family elder want to kill him. As soon as the Mu family elder finished speaking, San Long stepped in front of Xiaochen and looked directly at the Mu family elder. It's a little embarrassing for the Mu family to bully the younger generation. Anyone could feel the faint murderous intent emanating from the elder of the Mu family, so San Long immediately stepped forward to protect Xiaochen. Upon hearing San Long's words, the elder from the Mu clan did not reply. Instead, he stared deeply at Xiaochen before slowly withdrawing the aura from his body. He then ordered his men to carry the unconscious Mu Feng away. After that, he no longer spoke. Xiaochen was the king of pride of the Celestial Sword Peak. It was said that the Nine Clouds sovereign thought highly of Xiaochen. Therefore, the Mu family elder knew that he couldn't kill Xiaochen, at least not in front of so many people. With his strength, if he insisted on killing Xiaochen, San Long would not be able to stop him. However, if Xiaochen died, then the ruler of the continent of the Nine Clouds would definitely come and punish him. At that time, the two overlords would start a war, or the Mu family elder would hand him over to the ruler of the continent. Anyway, no matter what, he would die. Therefore, even though the Mu family elder's murderous intent, he didn't attack. Even the Mu family elder had chosen to endure, so the Yao family elder didn't say anything. After all, they were not as strong as the Mu family elder. The Yao family also chose to remain silent, but Xiaochen obviously didn't intend to leave the matter at that. His gaze fell directly on the Yao family patriarch Yao Ming, and said in an indifferent tone, "Yao family patriarch, just now you said that the space is limited, so there is no need for us to arrange a seat for the Sky Sword Peak. So there is no need to trouble yourself, just give your Yao family seat to us. My Sky Sword Peak will not care about this." The Yao family elder wanted to make things difficult for the Celestial Sword Peak. Therefore, Xiaochen wanted to sit on the Celestial Sword Peak stage and make the Yao family elder roll off the stage. Xiaochen's words were very straightforward, and the meaning was also very obvious. Hearing Xiaochen's words, the Yao family head's face immediately sank. "What do you mean?" Xiaochen wanted to drive the Yao family off the stage? As the host, Xiaochen actually dared to drive the Yao family off the stage. With a gloomy face, Yao Ming replied coldly, "Xiaochen, don't go too far. I admit that my Yao family was negligent in this matter, but we are willing to compensate for it. Don't be so aggressive. Yao family elder, you just said that this was your Yao family's negligence. Since that's the case, isn't it reasonable for your Yao family to give up your seat to us? Moreover, look at the people sitting on the stage. Which one of them isn't a member of an overlord force? Only your Yao family is a small family in the city. The strongest person in your family is only at the Dao transformation stage. In the younger generation, you only have Yao Changqing, a waste. If the Mu family has a king of pride that I am interested in, then what does your Yao family have? So, what right does your Yao family have to be on equal footing with us, the overlord forces?" When he heard Yao Ming's words, Xiaochen shouted loudly. He was completely unafraid of Yao Ming's status. Of course, a mere Yao family elder was not enough to make Xiaochen care. These words were like a slap in the face. Yao Ming looked at Xiaochen with a face full of anger. In response, Xiaochen calmly looked back at him. Those who humiliate others will be humiliated by others. It was a very simple principle. If your Yao family wanted to humiliate my Sky Sword Peak, then I will naturally humiliate your Yao family. Not knowing how to refute Xiaochen's words, the Yao family elder, who was sitting on one side of the Heaven Dan Valley, finally spoke. "Yao Ming, take your people and leave." As an elder of the Heaven Dan Valley, the Yao family elder naturally sat together with the people of the Heaven Dan Valley. The elder personally spoke. Hearing this, Yao Ming's face sank. As the organizer, he was actually driven off the high platform. His face was ashen, but Yao Ming did not say anything in the end. He led the people of the Yao family down the high platform, while Xiaochen, San Wang, and the people of the Sky Sword Peak sat on the seats of the Yao family. No one would have thought that the final result would be like this. The Sky Sword Peak, which was supposed to lose face, had actually made the Yao family unable to show their face. Yao Ming led his people down the high platform. At this time, the Yao family elder also took the initiative to apologize to San Wang Peak Master. "I hope you can forgive me for today's matter. From the beginning, no one paid attention to the Yao family elder, but now, the Yao family elder personally apologized, and his attitude was extremely respectful and sincere." All these changes were brought about by Xiaochen. In the face of the Yao family elder's apology, San Wang nodded and did not make things difficult for him. The matter seemed to have come to an end, but the hatred in Yao Changqing's eyes grew stronger. Then, accompanied by Yao Ming's opening speech, the Medicine King's Grand Meet officially began. Although it was called the Medicine King's Grand Meet, it was more like an auction, except that the items being auctioned were some spiritual herbs or elixirs. Of course, the elixirs and spiritual herbs in the Medicine King's Grand Meet were relatively rare in the outside world. Today was the day of the auction, but tomorrow there was a highlight, and that was the Deputy Valley Master of the Heaven Dan Valley coming to the city of the Medicine King to recruit disciples. The Heaven Dan Valley had a total of 9 Deputy Valley Masters, and their cultivation was at the Dao Sovereign Realm, equivalent to the 9 Peak Masters of the 9 Cloud Palace. They were extremely powerful, and their status was only below the 7 Great Rulers. The attraction of such a powerhouse coming to recruit disciples was needless to say. Many of the forces present had just come because they had heard the news in advance. It could be said that today's auction was just an appetizer, and tomorrow's disciple recruitment was the real main course. Once chosen, it was absolutely like a crow turning into a phoenix, and one could become a disciple of a Tao sovereign expert in one step. Chapter 122. With the exception of the disciples from the 7 overlord forces, the disciples from the other forces were all looking forward to the disciple recruitment. Xiaochen sat on a chair with nothing to do as he watched the medicinal pills being auctioned off. Truth be told, the medicinal pills were not bad. However, he did not need them for the time being. Since he did not need them, he was not interested in them. The other disciples from Heavenly Sword Peak, on the other hand, bought some medicinal pills one after another. Seeing them compete with each other, Xiaochen smiled. It seemed that after arriving at 9 Firmament's palace, their lives had improved considerably. They also had a lot more spirit stones in their pockets. In the past, when they were still in the Eastern Sun region, the disciples would only be able to spend a few hundred low-grade spirit stones. Now, however, they could casually spend over 1,000 low-grade spirit stones. Of course, such a change could not be separated from 9 Firmament's palace's support. Heavenly Sword Peak had just returned to 9 Firmament's palace. Its strength could be said to be at the bottom of the 9 peaks. Compared to the other 8 peaks, it was far inferior. As such, the ruler of the continent of the 9 Firmaments hoped that Heavenly Sword Peak could grow as quickly as possible. Thus, when it came to cultivation resources, the ruler of the continent of the 9 Firmaments would naturally favor Heavenly Sword Peak, especially Cangluang, Changxian and Changyun. The ruler of the continent of the 9 Firmaments hoped that they could break through to the Tao Transformation stage, Tao King stage or even Tao Sovereign stage as soon as possible. Under normal circumstances, the 9 peak lords of 9 Firmaments Palace were all Tao Sovereigns. Changxian and the other 2's cultivation bases were simply too low. They were even inferior to the elders of the other 8 peaks. This could not go on. There was no need to worry about cultivation resources for now. It could even be said that Heavenly Sword Peak's cultivation resources had surpassed the other 8 peaks due to the ruler of the continent of the 9 Firmaments. However, such a situation would not last for long. Thus, the disciples of Heavenly Sword Peak had to make use of this golden period to increase their overall strength as soon as possible. A faint smile appeared on his face as he thought about the Heavenly Sword Peak. Xiaochen did not notice that not far away, a pair of beautiful eyes had not left him since the beginning. She had been sizing him up with a thoughtful expression. Helian, a genius from Baijian Peak. After witnessing Xiaochen defeat 13 geniuses with her own eyes, Helian could not help but fall in love with Xiaochen. Xiaochen had a handsome appearance, an ethereal temperament, an indifferent attitude, and a terrifying strength. All of these added together made Xiaochen an irresistible attraction. Ever since she was young, Helian had seen many geniuses. However, until now, none of them could compare to Xiaochen. No matter in which aspect, Xiaochen had become Helian's dream lover. Xiaochen didn't notice Helian's infatuated gaze. While he was idling around, a pill called the 100 Years Pill was brought up for auction. There were 2 pills in total, and the starting price was 2,000 low-grade spirit stones. Seeing these 200-years-old pills, Xiaochen's interest was finally piqued. These 100-years-old pills were useless to him, but they were extremely useful to his parents. Xiaoqing and Bairuyua's cultivation talent could only be considered ordinary, so even though Xiaochen had given them a lot of cultivation resources, the 2 of them were only at the Earth Clear Mirror entry stage. As the name implied, these 100-years-old pills could increase a person's lifespan. As for his parents, Xiaochen didn't need them to have strong combat strength. He only wanted them to live a long life. Whenever he thought of his parents turning into a pile of yellow soil one day, Xiaochen felt extremely reluctant. Therefore, pills that could increase one's lifespan were better for Xiaochen. He didn't need them, but he could give them to his parents. Xiaochen wanted them to live a long life. It was best if the family could never be separated. Without any hesitation, Xiaochen opened his mouth after a small faction's patriarch bid 5,000. 10,000, he directly doubled the price. Xiaochen wouldn't frown if he was buying things for himself. Xiaochen didn't care about the price when he was buying things for his parents. In Xiaochen's opinion, even if he had to pay 100,000 low-grade spirit stones today, he would obtain these 200-years-old pills. He was determined to obtain them. In the end, after a round of bidding, Xiaochen finally bought the 200-years-old pills at the price of 30,000 low-grade spirit stones. He carefully stored them in his storage ring. When he had time to return to Langshan City, he would give them to his parents. A smile unconsciously appeared on his face. Xiaochen did not bid for the rest of the auction. The auction continued until dusk, when it finally ended. After that, the Yao family arranged a banquet and invited people from all the major forces to gather in one place. The banquet was held in the Yao family's main square. Maids quickly arranged the tables, chairs, bowls, and chopsticks. Ordinary factions ate in the main courtyard, while the 7 overlord factions, as well as the host, the Yao family, ate in the main hall. No one looked down on the Sky Sword Peak anymore. They sat down with San Wang and the others and ate the delicacies meticulously prepared by the Yao family. No one was interested in chatting with others. However, at this time, He Lian, who was wearing a long green dress, took the initiative to approach Xiaochen. He Lian was the only female Heaven's Pride who came this time, so she naturally received a lot of attention. Moreover, she was also a beauty. At this time, seeing He Lian take the initiative to approach Xiaochen, the other Heaven's Prides, who originally had fantasies about He Lian, all revealed a helpless smile. If it wasn't for the incident during the day, these Heaven's Prides would definitely not give up. However, after experiencing Xiaochen's strength, they didn't dare to provoke Xiaochen. Moreover, anyone could see that He Lian already had a good impression of Xiaochen. Wasn't fighting with Xiaochen the same as lighting a lamp in the toilet? Wasn't that courting death? Taking the initiative to approach Xiaochen, He Lian blushed and said softly, "That. Senior brother Xiaochen, can I sit here?" She was obviously a little shy. Hearing this, Xiaochen smiled and said, "Sure." Happily sitting down beside Xiaochen, He Lian constantly tried to find a topic to chat with Xiaochen. However, throughout the entire process, although Xiaochen appeared to be very approachable, he gave off an unapproachable feeling. Xiaochen didn't have any feelings for He Lian. Although she was pretty, she was still far from Qin Shuru, who had awakened the Yin spirit body. Xiaochen naturally wouldn't be charmed by her appearance. The atmosphere of the banquet was extraordinarily lively. San Wang was also invited to drink with the powerhouses of the 7 major forces, while Xiaochen and He Lian chatted casually. Just as everyone was enjoying themselves, Mu Feng and Yao Changqing gathered together in Mu Feng's room with gloomy expressions. Mu Feng looked at Yao Changqing and said coldly, "Xiaochen, I will not let you off." Due to their injuries and perhaps because they were too ashamed to face others, Mu Feng and Yao Changqing didn't attend the banquet today. Their hearts were filled with hatred as if they couldn't wait to swallow Xiaochen alive. Facing Mu Feng's cold scolding, Yao Changqing's eyes flickered with a sinister glint. "Don't worry, Brother Mu. I have already thought of a way to humiliate Xiaochen. Please add, recommend, reward." Chapter 123. Don't worry, Brother Mu. I've already thought of a way to make Xiaochen lose all his face. Both of them hated Xiaochen. Now that Yao Changqing said that he had thought of a way to make Xiaochen lose all his face, Mu Feng immediately became spirited. He looked at Yao Changqing expectantly and asked, "What is it, Brother Yao? Let's hear it." "Don't worry, Brother Mu. Isn't the Deputy Valley Master of the Dan Valley coming to recruit disciples tomorrow? At that time, we will think of a way to force Xiaochen to participate. Although his strength is heaven-defying, I am absolutely confident that I can defeat Xiaochen in terms of alchemy. When the time comes, I will definitely take revenge for the humiliation I suffered today in front of everyone." Yao Changqing sneered. In terms of strength, Mu Feng and Yao Changqing were no match for Xiao Chen. Therefore, they could only take revenge through other means. Tomorrow was the best opportunity. When the Deputy Valley Master of the Dan Valley recruited disciples, they naturally had to go through an assessment. Only those who had excellent talent in alchemy could be chosen by the Deputy Valley Master. Xiao Chen's strength was strong, but how much did Xiao Chen know about alchemy? Yao Changqing was from the Yao family and had been in contact with alchemy since he was young. He was confident that if they competed in alchemy, he could defeat Xiao Chen hundreds of times. After hearing Yao Changqing's words, Mu Feng let out a cold laugh. At the same time, his attitude towards Yao Changqing was much better. He put his arm around Yao Changqing's shoulder and said with a smile on his face, "Good, good, Brother Yao's plan is wonderful. Let's do it. Tomorrow, I want to see what kind of expression Xiao Chen will have when he makes a fool of himself in front of everyone." Haha, in order to take revenge on Xiao Chen, the two of them came up with such a vicious plan, and Xiao Chen was still unaware of it. After the banquet ended, they followed the people from the Sky Sword Peak back to their residence. Of course, it was no longer the side courtyard from yesterday. Instead, it was a main courtyard with a beautiful environment. Furthermore, there were even maids specially prepared for the people from the Sky Sword Peak. San Long took Xiao Chen to the study. After such a long time, Xiao Chen had not only made it out of the All-Beast mountain range alive, but also made it to the central divine realm. San Long naturally had a lot to ask Xiao Chen. Knowing what Azure Dragon wanted to ask him, Xiao Chen had already prepared an answer. He did not mention the kingdom of monster beasts, Chenling, or Longqing. He only said that he was lucky to have passed through the 10,000 Beast mountain range and arrived in the central plains. San Long did not pursue the matter. He was just asking casually. Since Xiao Chen was still alive, nothing else mattered. After chatting with Azure Dragon for half an hour, Xiao Chen returned to his room alone and began to cultivate. After a silent night, the next morning arrived. The atmosphere in the Yao family was even more lively. It was only early in the morning, but people from various major forces had already flocked to the Yao family's main square. Today was the day that the Deputy Valley Master of the Heavenly Dan Valley was accepting a disciple. He was a super expert in the Dao Sovereign Realm. In the entire Heavenly Qin continent, his position was second only to the 7 rulers. Everyone was naturally excited that such a person was accepting a disciple. It was still early, but the Yao family's main square was already crowded with people. When Xiao Chen and the others arrived, the entire main square was already packed. Unlike yesterday, other than the high platform at the front of the main plaza, the center of the main plaza had also been cleared out. Moreover, there were a total of 100 wooden tables and an equal number of pill furnaces placed there. Obviously, these should be used for the assessment later. The 7 overlords had arrived one after another. Today, the Yao family did not make any stupid mistakes. They arranged seats for the Sky Sword Peak and sat down directly on the high platform. Then, everyone began to wait. As for the person they were waiting for, it was naturally the Deputy Valley Master of the Heavenly Dan Valley. Patiently waiting, no one dared to show the slightest dissatisfaction. After all, the Deputy Valley Master was a super expert in the Dao Sovereign Realm. After waiting for about an hour, a middle-aged man wearing a Danyan white robe and holding a wine gourd appeared in the sky above the Yao family's main square without any warning. Seeing this person appear, the experts of the 7 overlords on the high platform were the first to come back to their senses. Immediately, many people recognized the identity of this person. Elder Hong Gang of the Baijian Peak said softly, "I didn't expect it to be the 9th Valley Master, Danyan Dao Master." The Heavenly Elixir Valley had a Valley Master, who was the Heavenly Elixir Ruler. Under the Heavenly Elixir Ruler were 9 Deputy Valley Masters, who were also 9 Great Dao Venerables. Dao Master Danyan ranked 9th among the 9 Deputy Valley Masters. Although he was ranked last, this did not mean that Danyan Dao Master was weak. On the contrary, among the 9 Deputy Valley Masters of the Heavenly Dan Valley, Danyan Dao Master's strength was enough to rank in the top 3. Moreover, Danyan Dao Master was the youngest among the 9 Deputy Valley Masters, and was regarded as the most likely person to become the next heavenly pill sovereign. No one expected that Danyan Dao Master would come to accept a disciple. It was said that Danyan Dao Master had never accepted a disciple in his life, and only his daughter had received all his teachings. Now, his daughter was also one of the 10 proud kings, and could be said to be the #1 heaven's pride in the heavenly Dan Valley. Recognizing Danyan Dao Master, the experts of the 7 overlords all stood up and saluted. "Greetings, Danyan Dao Master, everyone has been waiting for a long time." Facing the salutes of the crowd, Danyan Dao Master burped, and his body swayed as he spoke. He did not look like a Dao Master at all. Danyan Dao Master came to the main seat that had been prepared for him and sat down. Today, Danyan Dao Master was the main character. At the same time, he was also the one with the highest cultivation and the highest status. Danyan Dao Master sat down, looked around at the crowd, and then said with a slightly tipsy face, "Everyone, today I will only accept one disciple, and that person will be my last disciple. I will only accept one disciple in my life, so I can't guarantee that I will accept any of you as my disciple today. If I don't like any of you, then I can only give up. Only one disciple, and that person would be his last disciple." Hearing this, the crowd instantly became excited. A last disciple and an ordinary disciple were 2 completely different concepts. Of course, the requirements for a last disciple were naturally higher than an ordinary disciple. However, once one became the last disciple of Danyan Dao Master, the treatment would definitely be many times better than an ordinary disciple. He said bluntly that he would only accept one disciple in his lifetime, and the city of the King of Medicine was only the first stop of Dao Master Danyun. If there was no one he liked, Dao Master Danyun would not accept anyone. After a while, Dao Master Danyun opened his mouth and said, "Of course, if there is someone who is talented, even if he can't become my disciple, I will accept him into the heavenly Elixir Valley. Alright, let's cut the crap and get started. Please collect, recommend, reward." Chapter 124. Pill Cloud Dao Master signaled the start of the assessment. Anyone who wanted to become his disciple could participate as long as they were under the age of 25. The assessment process was very simple and was divided into 3 parts. The first test was one's ability to control fire. As an alchemist, the ability to control fire was very important. The second test was one's soul force. The third test was one's ability to refine pills. Of course, the pills tested were the most basic. The pill recipes and materials were all provided by Pill Cloud Dao Master. Following Pill Cloud Dao Master's voice, the young talents came to the center of the main square. The Yao family had already prepared alchemical furnaces for this assessment. Every time there were 100 people in the assessment, because of the large number of people, there were naturally several rounds of assessment. In the first round, Yao Changqing did not go on stage, so he did not make trouble for Xiaochen. Sitting on the high platform, Xiaochen saw everyone in the center of the square releasing their spiritual power, forming a spiritual fire. This spiritual fire was an indispensable ingredient in alchemy. Spiritual fire was a flame formed by burning spiritual power. It was reasonable to say that any martial artist had a spiritual fire, but having it was one thing, and being able to control it was another. One must know that the control of spiritual fire was directly related to the success or failure of alchemy. Not only did one need to be able to control the size of the fire, but one also needed to be able to freely release it. Even those advanced alchemists needed to be able to refine the fire into threads. Therefore, the control of spiritual fire was the foundation of alchemy. One by one, the young geniuses displayed their spirit fire according to Dao Master Danyun's request. Balls of spirit fire appeared in everyone's hands. However, Dao Master Danyun didn't care at all. He drank the wine in his gourd while lazily leaning on his chair as if he didn't care about them at all. The entire assessment process was presided over by the Yao family old ancestor. After the first round of spiritual fire assessment ended, Pill Cloud Dao Master did not say a word. No one knew what Pill Cloud Dao Master meant. Everyone was somewhat nervous as they began the second part of the assessment. The second part tested soul force. This soul force assessment was relatively simple. Everyone came to the Yao family old ancestors' side and reached out to touch the soul stone. The soul stone would bloom according to the intensity of each person's soul force. Under normal circumstances, as one's cultivation level increased, the strength of one's soul would also increase. However, due to the age restriction this time around, almost all of the participants were at the mysterious Yuan stage. Most mysterious Yuan stage practitioners only had a soul strength of around 10 feet. Very few of them were able to reach 20 feet. As for 30 feet, there was less than 1 in 10,000. Moreover, at the level of the mysterious Ian realm, it was impossible for anyone to cultivate a cultivation technique that could strengthen their soul force, because at this stage, a martial artist's soul was still very weak. It was completely impossible to use external forces to strengthen it. Only after surpassing the heaven realm could one cultivate a cultivation technique that could strengthen one's soul force. Therefore, the strength of everyone's soul force was completely innate, and it also happened to represent whether or not everyone had the talent to become an alchemist. The stronger one's innate soul force was, the higher one's innate talent would be. In the future, it would be easier for one to become a profound alchemist. This was something that everyone knew. Everyone began to take the test one after another. However, after a total of 100 people had passed, the person with the best result only had a soul strength of 2 inches. After 2 rounds of examination, the third round of examination had not yet begun. The drunk Tao Master Dan Yun opened his mouth and said, "All right, no need. Let's move on to the next batch." He indicated that there was no need to start the third round of examination. It was obvious that no one in this batch could enter the eyes of Tao Master Dan Yun, so there was no need to proceed with the third round of examination. Hearing Tao Master Dan Yun's words, the Yao family old ancestor naturally obeyed and directly replaced the second batch of disciples. Yao Changqing was still not among them. Just like the first batch, the second batch of disciples only went through the first 2 rounds of examination before being stopped by Tao Master Dan Yun, and did not start the third round. Then the third batch, the fourth batch, the results were the same. In the end, it was already the 5th batch of disciples, which was also the last batch. The number of people was less than 100, and this time, Yao Changqing was among them. He was the last to participate in the examination. Slowly walking to the center of the square, Yao Changqing looked at Xiaochen with a sneer. He was sneering in his heart, but on the surface, he said with a calm face, "Xiaochen, I don't accept yesterday's matter. Today, I want to challenge you. Do you dare to compete with me in alchemy?" Yao Changqing wanted to compete with Xiaochen in alchemy. As soon as these words came out, everyone present was stunned, but then they revealed a look of disdain. This Yao Changqing was simply a little shameless. He was born in the Yao family and had been in contact with alchemy since he was young. But Xiaochen, who was focused on martial arts, had probably never been in contact with alchemy. What was the point of such a competition? Upon hearing Yao Changqing's words, Xiaochen sneered and said, "Yao Changqing, you're really shameless, aren't you?" He had never been in contact with alchemy, and Yao Changqing actually wanted to compete with him in alchemy? This was simply ridiculous. Yao Changqing did not hide the disdain in his heart. In this regard, Yao Changqing's face was a little ugly, but in order to take revenge for yesterday's incident, Yao Changqing could not care less. He immediately braced himself and replied, "Xiaochen, don't talk nonsense. Just say whether you dare to accept the challenge or not. Or is it that you, the proud king of the Sky Sword Peak, don't even have the courage to fight?" "That's right, Xiaochen. If you don't dare to accept the challenge, then get lost. As a heaven's pride, you don't even have the courage to fight. It's simply shameful." As soon as Yao Changqing's voice fell, Mu Feng also spoke out. In the end, Yao Changqing also took out 2 divine origin pills. He was willing to use these 2 pills as a bet to compete with Xiaochen in alchemy. As long as Xiaochen won, these 2 divine origin pills would belong to Xiaochen. Seeing the divine origin pills, Xiaochen's heart skipped a beat. Just like the 100H pill he had bought yesterday, the Divine Origin pill was also a kind of pill that could increase one's lifespan. However, compared to the 100H pill, the Divine Origin pill was more than 1 grade stronger. This Divine Origin pill was a genuine heaven-grade pill. Yesterday, when he learned that Xiaochen had bid for 200H pills, Yao Changqing knew that Xiaochen was in need of pills that could increase one's lifespan. Therefore, before this, he deliberately borrowed these 2 Divine Origin pills from his father as a bet to lure Xiaochen to accept the challenge. Of course, Yao Changqing never thought that he would give these 2 Divine Origin pills to Xiaochen, because Yao Changqing never thought that he would lose. Not to mention other things, but in terms of alchemy, how could Yao Changqing lose to someone who had never touched alchemy before? Seeing that Yao Changqing had actually taken out 2 Divine Origin pills, Xiaochen, who originally intended to ignore the 2, slowly stood up and said in a dull tone, "Since it's a bet, how do we determine the winner and loser?" After all, although the Divine Origin pill was only a heaven-grade pill, it was basically priceless. Even in the Yao family, these 2 Divine Origin pills were absolute treasures. Even the Yao family old ancestor was reluctant to use them. Therefore, Xiaochen's heart was moved. However, before that, he naturally had to ask about the winner and loser. It was impossible to let the Yao family act as the referee. Chapter 125. Although he had never been in contact with alchemy, the 2 Divine Origin pills that Yao Changqing took out were too attractive. Although the Divine Origin pill was only a heaven-level pill, its main ingredient, the ivy vine, was almost extinct in the heavenly Qin continent. Therefore, the Divine Origin pill could be said to be extinct in the heavenly Qin continent. No one could refine it. His eyes were somewhat fiery as he looked at the 2 Divine Origin pills in Yao Changqing's hand. If he could get these 2 Divine Origin pills, his parents could at least increase their lifespan by 100 years. Seeing that Xiaochen was about to make a move, Yao Changqing's face immediately showed a sneer. He was secretly happy, but on the surface, he still said calmly, "How about we let Master Dao Master judge the outcome?" Knowing that Xiaochen would not let the Yao family people be the judge, Yao Changqing proposed to let Dao Master Dan Yun make the decision. Hearing Yao Changqing's words, Xiaochen and the Yao family old ancestor looked at Dao Master Dan Yun. Facing everyone's gaze, Dao Master Dan Yun burped and said indifferently, "As you wish." Obviously, he was not very interested, but he still agreed. Hearing Dao Master Dan Yun's words, Xiaochen nodded slightly and agreed to Yao Changqing's bet. Seeing Xiaochen nod, San Wang said anxiously, "Xiaochen, don't mess around. You have never been in contact with alchemy. How can you be Yao Changqing's opponent?" Yao Changqing was the Yao family's legitimate son and the Yao family's only heaven's pride. He had been in contact with alchemy since young and was personally taught by the Yao family old ancestor. Although his alchemy skills were not the best among the younger generation, they were definitely superior. Xiaochen had never been in contact with alchemy. If he competed with Yao Changqing in alchemy, wouldn't it be obvious that he would lose? San Wang tried to persuade Xiaochen not to be impulsive. In this regard, Xiaochen smiled and said, "Second Uncle Master, don't worry. Even if I lose, there's no harm to me." Xiaochen naturally knew that his chances of winning in alchemy were slim. The reason why he agreed to Yao Changqing's request was that he didn't need to pay any price at all in this gambling battle. On the contrary, as long as he was lucky enough to win, he would be able to get 2 Divine Yuan pills. Only a fool would refuse such an offer. As for the problem of face, Xiaochen did not even consider it. Moreover, even if he lost, would he really lose face? Obviously, he wouldn't. Everyone knew that he had never come into contact with alchemy, so it was normal for him to lose. On the contrary, Yao Changqing's approach had already caused many people present to despise him. Therefore, winning or losing this battle wouldn't harm Xiaochen in the slightest. So, why wouldn't he agree? Of course, Xiaochen wasn't completely unprepared. There were a total of 3 rounds of assessment. If he wanted to win, Xiaochen could only do his best to win the first round of spiritual fire assessment and the second round of spiritual force assessment. As for the third round of alchemy assessment, Xiaochen didn't have any hope at all because he simply didn't know how to do it. There was nothing to prepare for the spiritual force assessment. This was a matter of talent. As for the spiritual fire assessment, Xiaochen could only do his best. Having already made a decision in his heart, Xiaochen jumped and landed directly in the center of the main square. Seeing this, Yao Changqing glanced at Xiaochen contemptuously with a sneer on his face. In his heart, he secretly thought, "Xiaochen, today I will make you lose face." Xiaochen accepted the challenge, and then the Yao family old ancestor loudly announced the start of the spiritual fire assessment. Suddenly, everyone displayed their spiritual fire. The most eye-catching one was naturally Yao Changqing. A fist-sized spiritual fire emerged in Yao Changqing's hand, and under his control, the spiritual fire seemed to have its own spirituality and had a myriad of changes. As expected of the Yao family's genius, Yao Changqing's control of the spiritual fire is extremely profound. Looking at the spiritual fire in Yao Changqing's hand, many of the experts of the older generation couldn't help but praise. Indeed, Yao Changqing's control of the spiritual fire was completely comparable to many of the older generation of alchemy masters. Everyone secretly praised, but at this moment, the spiritual fire in Yao Changqing's hand slowly split into strands of flame that were only as thick as a strand of hair. This refining fire into silk, to be able to refine fire into silk at such a young age, refining fire into silk. Yao Changqing displayed refining fire into silk. For a moment, everyone present exclaimed one after another. Even Dao Master Danyun couldn't help but take a second look at him. To be able to refine fire into silk at such a young age, one had to admit that Yao Changqing's talent in alchemy was very good. Even in the celestial Dan Valley, he could be considered a genius. Among the hundreds of examinees, Yao Changqing was the only one who could refine fire into silk. Feeling the exclamations and envy of the surrounding people, Yao Changqing looked at Xiaochen with disdain. At the same time, Xiaochen was still trying to figure out how to ignite his spiritual power into spiritual fire. Xiaochen had never come into contact with any alchemy, so until now, he had no way to manifest the spiritual fire. Looking at Xiaochen's incomparably jerky movements, everyone secretly sighed. No one would look down on Xiaochen. After all, this was Xiaochen's first time coming into contact with alchemy, so his performance was understandable. Basically, it was already determined that Xiaochen would lose this battle. Yao Changqing's performance was worthy of his title as a genius. In alchemy, Yao Changqing really crushed Xiaochen. However, the crowd did not know that after dozens of attempts, Xiaochen had gradually mastered some of the tricks. He was fully focused and gathered his spiritual power in the center of his palm. He controlled the spiritual power with his mind and began to burn it. Soon, an extremely weak white flame appeared in the center of Xiaochen's palm. He actually manifested the spiritual fire in such a short time? Looking at the small white flame in Xiaochen's hand, the crowd, who had been shaking their heads and sighing, was surprised at this time. A person who had never come into contact with alchemy actually manifested the spiritual fire in just over 100 breaths. So, Xiaochen's talent in alchemy was not weak? Otherwise, it would be impossible to do this. Xiaochen's performance was somewhat out of everyone's expectations, but compared to Yao Changqing, it was still far from enough. He was still going to lose. Everyone shook their heads. But at this moment, Dao Master Danyun on the high platform inadvertently glanced at the white spiritual fire in Xiaochen's hand. It was very weak, and Xiaochen obviously hadn't mastered how to control the spiritual fire. But it was this inadvertent glance that made Dao Master Danyun's indifferent expression disappear in an instant. His face immediately revealed a touch of excitement. He took a step forward and instantly appeared in front of Xiaochen. He said with a look of disbelief, "Heavenly fire, you actually have the heavenly fire." Staring at the white flame in Xiaochen's hand, Dao Master Danyun said somewhat excitedly. After being startled, the spiritual fire in Xiaochen's hand was extinguished instantly. Xiaochen smiled helplessly. Chapter 126. Tao Master Dan Yun, who had been calm and composed, suddenly became so excited that no one could react. What was going on? Tao Master Dan Yun didn't change his expression when Yao Changqing refined the fire into threads. What was going on now? Heavenly fire. Tao Master Dan Yun just mentioned heavenly fire. Someone vaguely heard Tao Master Dan Yun mention heavenly fire and asked doubtfully. I think I heard it too, but it's impossible, right? Everyone whispered. They all knew what heavenly fire represented. The spiritual fire used by alchemists was naturally divided into different grades. From low to high, it was divided into spiritual fire, earthly fire, and heavenly fire. The spiritual fire was naturally the most common type of flame. Any martial artist could possess it. As for the earth fire, it was a flame that some powerful alchemists, through their hard work, constantly tempered their own spiritual fire. It was a flame that carried a special attribute, and was called the earth fire. Compared to spiritual fire, earthly fire was definitely much stronger. However, even though earthly fire was strong, it couldn't be compared to heavenly fire. Heavenly fire was a gift from the heavens. It was innate and couldn't be formed. Just like some special physiques, heavenly fire was naturally formed. Some people with outstanding talent were born with heavenly fire. After burning their spiritual power, they would have a special attribute. This was something that could not be achieved later in life. Therefore, heavenly fire was much stronger than earthly fire. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that people who had heavenly fire were born alchemists. With heavenly fire, they had an advantage in alchemy that ordinary people couldn't compare with. This advantage was a gift from the heavens. Of course, heavenly fire was extremely rare. In the entire heavenly Qin continent, the number of people who were known to have heavenly fire was less than 5. He was the only one who had heavenly fire. Other than him, Tao Master Dan Yun only had earthly fire. It was because of this that Tao Master Dan Yun was so excited after seeing Xiao Chen actually had heavenly fire. Tao Master Dan Yun's eyes were filled with a mixture of disbelief and excitement. Looking at Xiao Chen, Tao Master Dan Yun said eagerly, "Show me the spiritual fire again." Tao Master Dan Yun was still a little uncertain. After all, heavenly flames were simply too rare. Therefore, he wanted to confirm it once more. Hearing Tao Master Dan Yun's words, Xiao Chen naturally didn't know anything about the heaven fire. He nodded and showed his spiritual fire again. It was a white flame. Moreover, it did not give off a scorching feeling like ordinary flames. On the contrary, one could feel a sharp sword chi from the white flame. The flame actually gave off a sharp feeling. It was obvious that only heavenly fire and earthly fire could achieve this. However, Xiao Chen had never come into contact with the Tao of alchemy, so it naturally couldn't be earthly fire. It was indeed the heavenly flame. However, even Xiao Chen did not know that the heavenly flame he possessed was actually related to the heavenly law sword embryo. Tao Master Dan Yun stared at the white flame in Xiao Chen's hand. After a long while, he said softly, "Heavenly flame, it really is the heavenly flame." It had been confirmed that Xiao Chen possessed the heavenly fire. Hearing this, everyone around was stunned, and Yao Changqing's face was extremely gloomy. He could refine the flame into a thread, but compared to Xiao Chen's heavenly flame, it was nothing. This was a difference in nature that couldn't be made up with. With hard work, Xiao Chen could also refine the flame into a thread and possess the heavenly flame. Xiao Chen could easily become an alchemist because refining pills with the heavenly flame was too easy. There was almost no possibility of the furnace exploding. This was the terror of the heavenly flame. Yao Changqing did not expect that Xiao Chen actually possessed the heavenly flame. He gritted his teeth as if they were about to break. Yao Changqing stared coldly at Xiao Chen. The development of the matter had completely exceeded his expectations. Based on the heavenly flame alone, Xiao Chen had surpassed him by hundreds of streets. Now, the way Tao Master Dan Yun looked at Xiao Chen had completely changed. Looking at Xiao Chen, Tao Master Dan Yun said excitedly, "What's your name?" "Junior is Xiao Chen. I'm willing to accept you as my disciple." Tao Master Dan Yun had already decided to accept Xiao Chen as his disciple. There was no other way. There were very few people who possessed the heavenly flame. It was already a blessing from the heavens to meet one. There was no need for any other assessment. The heavenly flame had already explained everything. With the heavenly flame, Xiao Chen's future achievements in alchemy would not be weaker than his own. Dao Master Dan Yun was very clear about this point. Hearing that Dao Master Dan Yun was ready to accept Xiao Chen as his disciple, Yao Changqing felt as if he had eaten a fly. But what made him even more uncomfortable was that Xiao Chen actually refused Dao Master Dan Yun's offer. Xiao Chen smiled and said, "Senior Dao Master, can you let this junior and Yao Changqing finish the competition first?" To be honest, Xiao Chen was actually not very interested in alchemy. Yes, alchemists did have a terrifying network and were also extremely respected. However, under normal circumstances, many alchemists' fighting strength was not strong. They could only be regarded as ordinary among their peers. This was because they spent more time on alchemy. As a result, their cultivation of martial arts was naturally inferior to others. In Xiao Chen's mind, the so-called network and respect were empty. One's own strength was the most important thing. Xiao Chen's goal was to reach the peak of martial arts, not the so-called alchemy. Of course, this did not mean that alchemy was not good. It was just that Xiao Chen did not have much interest in alchemy. Seeing that Xiao Chen did not seem to be interested in alchemy, Dao Master Dan Yun was not angry. Instead, he revealed a happy smile and said, "Well, you two compete first. We'll talk after the competition." His attitude towards Xiao Chen had changed 180 degrees. It was not difficult to see how important the heavenly flame was to Dao Master Dan Yun. After saying that, Dao Master Dan Yun returned to the high platform. His eyes were still flashing with excitement, but he did not say anything more. Instead, he quietly waited for the competition between Xiao Chen and Yao Changqing. Originally, he wanted to make Xiao Chen lose face. But who knew that not only did he not succeed, but he also went for wool and came back shorn. Once again, Xiao Chen's reputation soared. Damn it! Dao Master Dan Yun cursed in his heart. At the same time, in the first round of the spiritual flame assessment, Xiao Chen had undoubtedly won. Even if Yao Changqing could refine fire into threads, he was only an ordinary spiritual flame. On the other hand, Xiao Chen had the heavenly flame. The gap between the two of them was not comparable at all. Yao Changqing lost in the first round. Next was the second round of the soul power assessment. For some reason, Yao Changqing was faintly worried. His original absolute confidence had collapsed a lot. He felt somewhat uneasy in his heart. Please collect, recommend, reward. Chapter 127. Yao Changqing originally thought that victory was in the bag, but who would have thought that Xiao Chen actually possessed the heaven flame? This made Yao Changqing's heart instantly lose confidence. He had already lost this round, and the second round of the soul force test was also a test of talent. If he lost again, then even if Yao Changqing won the third round, it would be useless. Perhaps even Yao Changqing did not realize that at this moment, he had already consciously believed that his talent was not as good as Xiao Chen's. Therefore, he was so worried about the second round of the soul force test. His face was full of worry, but the matter had already reached this point. Naturally, there was no chance for regret. Under the Yao family ancestors' supervision, the second round of the soul force test began. Very tacitly, Xiao Chen and Yao Changqing both chose to be the last to go on stage. One by one, the young talents finished the test. The highest one had a soul force of 4 inches. Finally, only Xiao Chen and Yao Changqing were left. Yao Changqing coldly glanced at Xiao Chen, and with some apprehension, he stepped in front of the Yao family ancestor. He gently placed his hand on the soul testing stone. In an instant, the soul testing stone emitted a white light. 1 inch, 2 inches, 3 inches. Soon, the soul testing stone's light grew to 5 inches, and finally stopped at 6 inches. With a soul force of 6 inches, Yao Changqing was the person with the best results so far. Originally, he should have been extremely happy, but for some reason, Yao Changqing was not happy. This was because there was still Xiaochen who had not yet been tested. After experiencing the heaven flame, Yao Changqing's heart was no longer calm. Facing Xiaochen, he could no longer be as indifferent as before. Releasing the soul testing stone, Yao Changqing looked at Xiaochen with a complicated expression. At the same time, Xiaochen indifferently brushed past Yao Changqing and arrived in front of the soul testing stone. Reaching out his hand, he gently grasped the soul testing stone, and the same white light shined. 1 inch, 2 inches, 3 inches. In just a few breaths, Xiaochen's soul force reached the same level as Yao Changqing's, 6 inches. At the moment when the white light reached 6 inches, Yao Changqing's heart constantly prayed, "Stop, stop, stop." The strength of Xiaochen's soul power had already reached the same level as his. Yao Changqing was screaming in his heart for Xiaochen to stop, but his prayers and shouts obviously did not have any effect. The white light that was originally only 6 inches long quickly expanded to 7 inches long. Seeing this scene, Yao Changqing's face completely paled. He had lost, he lost again. In the first round of the spiritual fire test, he lost the second round of the soul test. Even if he could defeat Xiaochen in the third round of alchemy test, he would still lose. He never thought that he would lose to Xiaochen, a person who had never come into contact with alchemy, even though he had been learning alchemy from the Grand Elders since he was a child. Yao Changqing looked like a deflated balloon. However, at that moment, no one noticed the change in Yao Changqing, as everyone's eyes were on Xiaochen. Someone exclaimed in surprise. "It's still growing. It's going to break through 8 inches." Xiaochen's soul force did not stop growing after reaching 7 inches. Soon, it reached 8 inches. 8 inches of soul force was extremely rare in the heavenly Chen continent. Even in the entire heavenly Dan Valley, there were only a few people who could reach this step. Everyone was shocked. However, just when everyone thought that Xiaochen's limit was 8 inches, the white light continued to grow. It was still growing, which meant that Xiaochen's soul force was not just 8 inches. Thinking that Xiaochen's soul force could reach 9 inches, everyone present could not remain calm. 9 inches, this could be said to be the limit of the soul testing stone. Moreover, anyone who had not cultivated their soul force could only reach 9 inches at most. In other words, 9 inches of soul force was the limit of one's innate soul force. Therefore, it was called the limit of soul force by the common people. In the end, Xiaochen's soul power had indeed increased to 9 inches, and that was the limit of his soul power. Heavenly flame, limit of soul force, this guy is simply a natural alchemist. Someone could not help but exclaim. That's not all. Xiaochen can be considered a genius even if he's a weapon refiner or a talisman master with his soul power, another person said. Needless to say, the heavenly fire was a gift from the heavens for alchemists. And the benefits brought about by the extreme soul strength were not limited to alchemists. It should be known that the requirements of soul strength for craftsmen and talisman masters were also extremely high. Therefore, Xiaochen, who possessed the extreme soul strength, could already be considered a genius even among craftsmen and talisman masters. No one had expected such a result. Originally, everyone thought that Xiaochen, who had never touched the Tao of Elixir, would lose in this battle. However, Xiaochen relied on his own talent to completely crush Yao Changqing in the first 2 rounds of assessment. He had already won 2 rounds in a row. Therefore, even if Xiaochen did not know alchemy and chose to forfeit in the 3rd round, Yao Changqing would still lose. His martial talent was heaven-defying, he had heavenly flame, and he also had the limit of soul force. Today, Xiaochen had really opened everyone's eyes. A person's talent could be so strong. Was this the difference between a king of geniuses and an ordinary heaven's pride? Everyone thought in their hearts. Their eyes were filled with worship, especially those of the younger generation. As people of the same generation, Xiaochen was enough for them to look up to. For a moment, it was unknown who spoke first. Motherf *Kerr, who was the one who kicked Xiaochen out of the top 10 king of geniuses? With such talent and combat strength, if Xiao Chen is not one of the top 10 king of geniuses, then who is? That's right, that's right. Don't worry, with Xiao Chen's performance today, once news of it spreads, he will naturally return to the top 10 king of geniuses. Everyone was discussing spiritedly, but Xiao Chen did not care. He slowly walked towards Yao Changqing and smiled. Are we still competing in the third round? I don't know alchemy. If you want to compete, then I will forfeit. Xiao Chen's words were very calm, and he did not hide anything. He directly said that he did not know alchemy, and if Yao Changqing wanted to compete, then he would forfeit. His words were very calm, but they were very harsh to Yao Changqing's ears. It was as if Xiao Chen was showing off. I don't know alchemy, but I can still beat you. As if he had been humiliated, Yao Changqing's face turned red. He did not know how to describe the look in his eyes. This time, not only did he not hurt Xiao Chen, but he had also become Xiao Chen's stepping stone, making him even more famous. Moreover, he had lost 2 divine origin pills. This was really a double loss. He really wanted to deny it, but with so many people present, Yao Changqing could not do that no matter how shameless he was. Moreover, at this time, the calm Yao family ancestor suddenly said, Changqing, if you agree to the bet, you must accept your loss. Give the divine origin pills to little friend Xiao Chen. Chapter 128. The Yao family old ancestor said. Although the divine origin Dan was very precious and there were not enough materials to refine the divine origin Dan, the Yao family old ancestor was very clear about which was more important than the face of the Yao family. There were so many people here, including the 7 overlord forces and Tao Master Dan Yun. If the Yao family acted shamelessly, there was no doubt that the Yao family would lose face. Moreover, Tao Master Dan Yun was fond of Xiao Chen. If he held a grudge against the Yao family, it would not be worth it. Therefore, the 2 divine origin pills could not be denied. Hearing the old ancestor's words, Yao Changqing's face turned gloomy, but he still handed the divine origin pills to Xiao Chen. He also knew that if he acted shamelessly, there would be consequences for the Yao family. Therefore, Yao Changqing had no room to act shamelessly. After receiving the divine origin pills from Yao Changqing, Xiao Chen smiled and said, "Thank you." Then, he returned to the high platform. All the tests had ended. Although Tao Master Dan Yun did not say who he would accept as his disciple until the last moment, everyone knew that Tao Master Dan Yun must have made a decision in his heart. With the heavenly fire and ultimate soul force, where could Tao Master Dan Yun find a genius like Xiao Chen? Even if he found one, he would have already found a master. Therefore, when the test ended, Tao Master Dan Yun directly left with the Sky Sword Peak people. Needless to say, it was obviously for Xiao Chen. Looking at Tao Master Dan Yun leaving with the Sky Sword Peak people, everyone was envious. Of course, all of this was what Xiao Chen deserved. Without the corresponding talent, how could Tao Master Dan Yun pay attention to him? All the way back to their residence, San Wang's attitude towards Tao Master Dan Yun was extremely respectful. No matter if it was strength or status, Tao Master Dan Yun was far superior to San Wang. Tao Master Dan Yun asked him to sit down in the living room. However, Tao Master Dan Yun was obviously not interested in San Wang. His only purpose was very clear and very obvious. It was just for Xiao Chen. Xiao Chen's talent had caught Tao Master Dan Yun's attention. Needless to say, his sky fire and extreme soul force were beyond his expectation. Naturally, Tao Master Dan Yun would pay more attention to a genius who had both sky fire and extreme soul force. Such a genius was rare. Now that he had encountered such a genius, Tao Master Dan Yun would not easily give up. Sitting on the main seat with San Wang, Tao Master Dan Yun looked down at Xiao Chen and said with a smile, "Xiao Chen, what do you think? Take me as your teacher and I'll treat you well." At this moment, Tao Master Dan Yun had completely sobered up. His eyes were filled with anticipation as he looked at Xiao Chen. After searching for so long, Xiao Chen was the disciple he had been looking for. With Xiao Chen's talent, he could definitely inherit his legacy. In fact, it wasn't impossible for him to surpass him in the Tao of Alchemy in the future. Tao Master Danyun waited expectantly for Xiao Chen's answer. Hearing that, Xiao Chen said awkwardly, "Junior, thanks Senior for your kindness. However, Junior is now a disciple of Heavenly Sword Peak. If I were to join the Heavenly Dan Valley, wouldn't that?" Xiao Chen did not have much interest in the Tao of Alchemy. Additionally, he did not want to divide his attention too much for the time being. Doing so would definitely affect his cultivation of the Tao of martial arts. Using Nine Firmaments Palace as an excuse, Tao Master Danyun said nonchalantly, "That's fine. Taking me as your teacher will not mean joining the Heavenly Dan Valley. It has nothing to do with the Heavenly Dan Valley. You are just my disciple. As for Nine Firmaments Palace, you can rest assured. Situations like this are not rare in the Central Divine region. Thus, Nine Firmaments Palace will not say anything." Tao Master Danyun's words were not false. However, Xiao Chen still revealed a troubled look. Looking at the expectant Tao Master Danyun, Xiao Chen sighed helplessly. In the end, he decided to tell the truth. "Senior, Junior will be frank with you. Truth be told, Junior has no interest in the Tao of Alchemy. Junior's ambition lies in the Tao of martial arts. Thus, Junior only wishes to focus on cultivation. I do not wish to delay my cultivation of the Tao of martial arts because of other matters." Tao Master Danyun was taken aback when he heard Xiao Chen's words. However, he quickly became so angry that he stamped his feet. "You fool," he directly scolded Xiao Chen for his ignorance. Seeing Tao Master Danyun become angry, San Long, who was beside him, quickly spoke up to console him. He was indeed afraid that Tao Master Danyun would vent his anger on Xiao Chen. However, in the face of San Long's words, Tao Master Danyun waved his hand, indicating for San Long and the others to leave. He had something to say to Xiao Chen alone. Regarding Xiao Chen's refusal, Tao Master Danyun was furious. In Xiao Chen's heart, the Tao of Alchemy had actually become a stumbling block to the Tao of martial arts. After everyone left, only Xiao Chen and Tao Master Danyun were left in the living room. Tao Master Danyun stood up and walked towards Xiao Chen. Then, with a straight face, Tao Master Danyun said, "Boy, do you know what the Tao of martial arts is? The Tao of martial arts includes thousands of things. The Tao of sword, Tao of saber, Tao of spear, Tao of fist, Tao of alchemy, Tao of talisman, Tao of weapon refining. These are all part of the Tao of martial arts," Tao Master Danyun said with a straight face. According to him, the Tao of alchemy would not hinder Xiao Chen's Tao of martial arts. On the contrary, it would be of great help to him. First of all, once Xiao Chen became an alchemist, it would mean that Xiao Chen would have an additional means. This was obviously beneficial without any harm. Moreover, the world thought that the alchemist's battle strength was pitifully low among the same level. However, they did not know that this was just a rumor spread by some ignorant people. Once the spiritual fire of an alchemist transformed into the earth fire, it would not only be used for alchemy, but also for fighting against enemies. The earth fire had such great power, not to mention the heaven fire. In addition, alchemists paid attention to the cultivation of soul force. The strength of soul force would not only improve the comprehension ability of martial artists, but also enhance their perception ability. In addition, there were many benefits to having a strong soul force. Tao Master Danyun told Xiao Chen all the benefits of becoming an alchemist and taught Xiao Chen everything about the Tao of martial arts. As a super expert of the Tao Master realm, Tao Master Danyun's understanding of the Tao of martial arts was naturally incomparable to that of Xiao Chen. Even San Long and the others were far inferior to Tao Master Danyun. After listening to Tao Master Danyun's words, Xiao Chen was suddenly enlightened. Although Xiao Chen's talent was outstanding, his understanding of the Tao of martial arts was still very one-sided. Today, Tao Master Danyun's words benefited Xiao Chen a lot. At the same time, he also found that his understanding of the Tao of martial arts was indeed too narrow. At the same time, he also had some prejudice against the Tao of elixir. Clearly aware of his mistakes, Xiao Chen did not resist the Tao of elixir. Because as Tao Master Danyun said, practicing both Tao of Elixir and Tao of Martial Arts would not only bring no harm to Xiao Chen, but also many benefits. After correcting his wrong views, Xiao Chen still had some difficulties in making a decision. However, to Xiao Chen's surprise, Tao Master Dan Yun did not wait for Xiao Chen's reply. Instead, Tao Master Dan Yun directly said, "Well, I've said what I should say. You've listened to my teachings, so you're my disciple. Today, you have to worship me as your master whether you want to or not. Please collect, recommend, reward." Chapter 129. Tao Master Dan Yun didn't give Xiao Chen any chance to refute. He didn't care whether Xiao Chen agreed or not. He pointed his finger and a white light flashed. Suddenly, a lot of knowledge about alchemy appeared in Xiao Chen's mind. Obviously, Tao Master Dan Yun was imparting the knowledge of alchemy to Xiao Chen. There were a lot of memories, but all of them were the most basic, including the introduction of heaven and earth treasures and the most basic alchemy techniques. Taking back his finger, Tao Master Dan Yun returned to his previous drunken appearance. His body was a little shaky as he said, "Remember these. Just like martial arts, if you want to be a qualified alchemist, the foundation is very important." He imparted the most basic knowledge to Xiao Chen. Actually, there was not much to teach about learning these things. All he had to do was memorize them. He had to firmly remember these basic knowledge before he could officially embark on the path of alchemy. Xiao Chen inexplicably became Tao Master Dan Yun's disciple, and Tao Master Dan Yun didn't seem to care about the apprenticeship ceremony. In his opinion, Xiao Chen was now his disciple. Helplessly, Xiao Chen simply sorted out the basic knowledge. He also found that the path of alchemy was really extraordinary. He really underestimated alchemists before. To become a qualified alchemist, one must not only be familiar with all kinds of heaven and earth treasures, but also be clear about the use and medicinal properties of all kinds of heaven and earth treasures. At the same time, the practice of spiritual fire must be extremely systematic and professional. Of course, this was also because of the existence of Tao Master Dan Yun. He was an existence that surpassed the existence of heaven-level alchemists. Only he could have such a profound understanding. Therefore, according to the knowledge he imparted, Xiao Chen should be able to grasp these basic knowledge very quickly. After accepting the inheritance of Tao Master Dan Yun, his view of alchemy had completely changed. After a little hesitation, Xiao Chen finally bowed to Tao Master Dan Yun and said, "Disciple pays his respects to Master." Hearing Xiao Chen call him Master, Tao Master Dan Yun was in a good mood. He laughed loudly and said, "Good, good. During this period of time, you should familiarize yourself with this knowledge. The next time we meet, I will teach you how to refine elixirs. Of course, the premise is that you must thoroughly master the way to control the spiritual fire before that." After saying that, Tao Master Core Clouds disappeared, leaving only his voice behind. "Master still has some matters to attend to. You should return to Nine Firmaments Palace first. Once Master is done, I will go find you. Remember, while the Tao of martial arts is important, alchemy must not be neglected." Tao Master Dan Yun left. He didn't hold the apprenticeship ceremony and left in a carefree manner. Hearing Tao Master Dan Yun's words, Xiao Chen smiled helplessly. Tao Master Dan Yun really did do as he pleased. However, since he was a super expert of the Tao Master realm, Tao Master Dan Yun was indeed qualified to do so. "The world is vast, where can I not go? I can do whatever I want. This is the freedom of the strong. Of course, without strength, you would not be able to do so." After successfully becoming Tao Master Dan Yun's apprentice, Xiao Chen told San Wang about it. As for the others, they were unaware. Neither Xiao Chen nor Tao Master Dan Yun cared about it. He had never thought that he would embark on the path of alchemy. Of course, Xiao Chen was very clear about this. For him, the Tao of martial arts was the most important. The path of alchemy was just a supporting one. San Wang was very happy that Xiao Chen had been accepted as a disciple by Tao Master Dan Yun. Moreover, he was his last disciple. Who was Tao Master Dan Yun, after all? He was one of the strongest existences under the seven sovereigns. Thus, San Wang did not have the slightest objection to Xiao Chen becoming his disciple. He believed that San Xian would also support it. After staying in the city of the King of Medicine for a day, Xiao Chen followed San Wang and the others back to Nine Cloud Palace. Riding on the golden-winged Great Peng Eagle, it would take 5 days to reach Nine Cloud Palace. Just as Xiao Chen and the others were leaving the city of the King of Medicine, in a small town near the Heavenly Dan Valley, Tao Master Dan Yun was drinking in a restaurant. He was drunk. His face was flushed and his eyes were slightly narrowed. He did not have the demeanor of a Tao Master at all. Just as Tao Master Dan Yun was drinking to his heart's content, a beautiful and gentle girl walked into the restaurant. The appearance of the girl caused everyone in the restaurant to unconsciously reveal a look of infatuation. However, when they saw the Heavenly Dan Valley's disciple uniform, they were stunned and did not dare to do anything out of line. The disciples of the Heavenly Dan Valley were existences that could not be offended in the Heavenly Dan Prefecture. The girl came directly to Tao Master Dan Yun. Looking at the messy Tao Master Dan Yun, the girl said unhappily, "Why did you drink so much again? Mother is looking for you. If you don't go back quickly, you will be in trouble." The girl's name was Ouyang Roshue. She was Tao Master Dan Yun's daughter and also the pride of the Heavenly Dan Valley. Hearing Ouyang Roshue's words, a smile appeared on Tao Master Dan Yun's drunken face. He hugged Ouyang Roshue and rubbed his stubbled chin on her delicate face. He laughed loudly and said, "Ha, my good daughter." It was obvious that Tao Master Dan Yun doted on Ouyang Roshue. Ouyang Roshue, whose face was stung by her father's stubbled beard, was unhappy. She pouted her lips and said, "Ha, you have a bright future ahead of you." Seeing Ouyang Roshue's expression, Tao Master Dan Yun laughed heartily and said, "Ha, my dear daughter, your father has finally met a genius this time. His talent is not any weaker than yours. I have already accepted him as my disciple and will leave for a period of time. Moreover, I have seen that you two are very compatible with each other. You are much better than those little guys who are pursuing you. When you two get familiar with each other, I will betroth you to him." Ha! Tao Master Dan Yun was very satisfied with Xiao Chen. He even had the thought of betrothing his daughter to Xiao Chen. However, Ouyang Roshue was unhappy when she heard this. Although she looked weak, she was the kind of person who was soft on the outside but tough on the inside. If she did not like something, she would not yield even if you beat her to death. Looking at her father's back, Ouyang Roshue raised her small fist angrily to express her dissatisfaction. Unfortunately, Tao Master Dan Yun did not care. He returned to the Heavenly Dan Valley. Soon, Tao Master Dan Yun arrived at his residence. In the courtyard, he saw a beautiful woman in a white dress. She looked like a fairy who had descended from the heavens. She was sitting elegantly in the courtyard. The woman was very beautiful. If the seven sovereigns were present, they would definitely recognize that she was the Heavenly Dan ruler. As one of the seven sovereigns, the Heavenly Dan ruler was actually a woman. Moreover, she was Tao Master Dan Yun's wife and Ouyang Roshue's mother. If this was known by outsiders, they would be shocked. Who would have thought that Tao Master Dan Yun and the Heavenly Dan ruler were husband and wife? Please add, recommend, reward. Chapter 130. Only a few people in the Tianqian continent knew that Dan Yun and the Heaven Alchemy ruler were husband and wife. Dan Yun looked at the Heaven Alchemy ruler, who was sitting in the garden, and burped. Then, he walked over to her and sat down next to her, smiling. "What's wrong? Why are you looking for me? Do you miss me?" joked the Heaven Alchemy ruler. When the Heaven Alchemy ruler heard that, she glanced at Dan Yun indifferently and said, "You're never serious. You don't even take care of the Dan Valley you created. You just wander around outside all day. Which man in the world would be like you? You push your wife out to take care of everything. You're a man, and you're always free and easy. Isn't it my good fortune to have found such a smart and capable wife?" Hearing the Heavenly Pill ruler's words, Tao Master Dan Yun continued to laugh shamelessly. the Heaven Alchemy ruler didn't know what to say about her husband. He had always been like that. She didn't know what she had seen in him back then. He was much stronger than her in every aspect, whether it was talent, temperament, or cultivation, but he was too lazy to care about anything in the Dan Valley. He just drank all day. He sighed helplessly. A few of the higher-ups in the Heavenly Pill Valley, as well as the other 6 pill rulers, knew that the Heavenly Pill ruler and Tao Master Dan Yun were husband and wife. After all, this kind of thing couldn't be hidden. However, only the wife, the Heavenly Pill ruler, knew how terrifying Tao Master Dan Yun was. Even his daughter, Ouyang Roshue, didn't know how powerful her father was. In other people's eyes, Dan Yun was a Dao Zun cultivator, but who would have thought that his wife, the Heaven Alchemy ruler, was much weaker than him? Her husband was the most talented person she had ever seen. In the entire Tianshan continent, only the ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds could compete with him. Unfortunately, they were both talented, but their personalities were completely different. The ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds had created the 9 Clouds Palace, and he was proud and heroic. On the other hand, her husband was strong, but he didn't care about anything. He was too lazy. He even asked his wife to take care of the Heavenly Pill Valley, while he concealed his identity and lived a carefree life. Upon seeing the Heavenly Alchemy ruler's displeasure, Tao Master Dan Yun didn't say anything. He just smiled foolishly. After a long while, when the Heavenly Alchemy ruler grew impatient, Tao Master Dan Yun finally spoke. "Madam, guess what happened when I went to the city of the King of Medicine?" "You accepted a disciple, what's wrong with that?" said the Heaven Alchemy ruler, "and Roshue, if you're free, you should teach Roshue. She's your daughter." "To you," said the Heaven Alchemy ruler angrily. He was the leader of the Celestial Dan Valley, so he knew what had happened in the city of the King of Medicine. Knowing that her husband had taken in a disciple, the Heavenly Pill ruler felt a little jealous. He had never even taught his own daughter before, but now he had taken in a disciple. Moreover, it was his last disciple. He was going to pass on his legacy to an outsider. As the Heavenly Pill ruler's mother, the Heavenly Pill ruler was naturally unhappy. Everyone thought that Ouyang Roshui's abilities were passed down to her by the Pill Cloud Dao Sovereign. However, they did not know that it was the exact opposite. The Pill Cloud Dao Sovereign had never taught Ouyang Roshui anything since she was young. Ouyang Roshui's abilities were all learned from her mother, who was the Heaven Pill Sovereign. He felt helpless. They had argued before, but no matter how angry the Heaven Alchemy ruler was, Dan Yun had never agreed to teach his daughter. "Sigh, how great would it be if Roshui's abilities really came from you, as the outside world says? With you teaching her, her current achievements would definitely be far greater than what they are now." The Heaven Pill ruler sighed helplessly and said helplessly. She knew that if her father, Dan Yun, was willing to teach Ouyang Roshui, her achievements would be much better than now. Unfortunately, she had such a father. Hearing the Heaven Alchemy ruler's sigh, Dan Yun said helplessly, "Madam, I don't have a choice. Master once said that our lineage is only passed to males and not females. Roshui is a girl. How am I supposed to pass it on? I can't go against Master's orders. But don't worry, madam. Xiaochen is a good kid. I'm very satisfied. Besides, I've thought about it. When this kid inherits my legacy, I'll let him marry Roshui. That way, we won't be a family. Don't you think so?" He already had the intention of letting Xiaochen marry Ouyang Roshui. Hearing Dan Yun's words, the Heaven Alchemy ruler stood up and said, "I can't control you. You can do whatever you want. Don't make Roshui refuse to acknowledge you as her father. If that happens, it won't be my problem." After saying that, the Heaven Alchemy ruler turned to leave. She wasn't like Dan Yun, who had many things to deal with in the entire Dan Valley. She didn't have much time to chat with this drunkard. Looking at his wife's back, Dao Master Dan Yun smiled faintly. Then, he shouted, "My wife, I will be leaving for 9 Firmaments Palace for a while. If there's anything, send someone to 9 Firmaments Palace's Heavenly Sword Peak to look for me. Do whatever you want, the Heaven Alchemy ruler replied snappily. Ignoring such a big heavenly Dan Valley and going to Nine Cloud Palace, the Heaven Alchemy ruler was naturally very dissatisfied. Seeing the angry Heaven Alchemy ruler, Dan Yun smiled and left the heavenly Dan Valley. Looking at the direction he was heading, it was likely that he was heading to Nine Cloud Palace. Unaware of Dan Yun's secret, Xiaochen and the others rushed back to Nine Cloud Palace from the city of the Medicine King 5 days later. The Heavenly Sword Peak was naturally overjoyed at the news that Xiaochen was still alive. Song Xian and Song Yan personally welcomed Xiaochen and the others. Seeing that Xiaochen was fine, Song Xian was so excited that tears flowed down his face. Xiaochen was the hope of the Heavenly Sword Peak. Now that Xiaochen was still alive, it proved that the Heavenly Sword Peak's hope was still there. Like Song Long, Song Xian and Song Yan also asked Xiaochen about what had happened in the past few months. Xiaochen explained everything again. Of course, Xiaochen did not say a word about what he should not say. After dealing with Song Xian and Song Yun, Xiaochen chatted with Mo Jia, Qian, Qin Heng and the others he was familiar with. After that, Xiaochen hurried to Qin Shuru's residence. Because everyone thought that he was dead, Qin Yao and Qin Luo naturally followed Qin Shuru. They quickly arrived at Qin Shuru's residence. Because of him, Qin Shuru's treatment was extremely good. It was not inferior to that of Qin Heng and the others. Looking at the 3 words "dustless residence" hanging above the courtyard gate, Xiaochen smiled. Clearly, this was done by Qin Shuru. Please collect, recommend, reward. Chapter 131. Dustless Residence. Even after coming to the Sky Sword Peak, Qin Shuru still kept the dustless residence. Xiaochen couldn't help but smile as she gazed at the 3 words "dustless residence." A warm feeling flowed in her heart. Xiaochen stepped into the courtyard. However, as soon as he arrived outside the main hall, he heard a man's voice coming from the main hall before he even stepped into it. "Junior sister Shui Ro, I really like you. I've already discussed it with the Peak Master. As long as you come to my prison Flame Peak, you will be able to enjoy the treatment of a core disciple. Staying in the Sky Sword Peak won't do you any good. Junior sister, trust me. The Sky Sword Peak won't exist for long. The Peak Master has already discussed with the other Peak Masters to abolish the Sky Sword Peak." Upon hearing this voice, Xiaochen came to a halt. Even though it was only a few short sentences, Xiaochen still received a lot of useful information from it. She didn't know who this man was, but she guessed that he should be an annoying fly. However, the fact that the Prison Flame Peak Master was going to abolish the Sky Sword Peak piqued Xiaochen's interest. According to him, ever since the previous Prison Flame Peak Master mysteriously disappeared, he had taken over the Prison Flame Peak and became the new Peak Master. At the same time, after the man's voice vanished, Qin Shuru's voice sounded. Qin Shuru's voice was ice cold. Unlike the gentleness he showed to Xiaochen, he spoke coldly. "Wang Qingfeng, please conduct yourself with dignity. I already have a husband." "Husband? You're talking about Xiaochen, right? I've heard of him, but he's already dead. Junior sister Shui Ro, why are you ruining your future for a dead man?" Wang Qingfeng replied to Qin Shuru's words. Qin Shuru was thoroughly enraged. If Wang Qingfeng was only pestering him, Qin Shuru could tolerate it. However, Wang Qingfeng humiliated Xiaochen and Qin Shuru couldn't tolerate it. A trace of murderous intent surged in his eyes. His already ice-cold temperament became even colder as though his aura alone could freeze thousands of miles. Wang Qingfeng's expression changed when he sensed the coldness emanating from Qin Shuru's body. However, just as Qin Shuru was about to make his move, Xiaochen had already walked in. He first looked at Qin Shuru in astonishment. This girl, in just a few months, not only had her cultivation increased to the advanced mysterious Yuan stage, but the coldness emanating from her body also shocked him. It was simply too cold. Seeing that someone had suddenly barged in, Qin Shuru and Qin Shuru turned to look at Xiaochen. When Qin Shuru saw the person who had barged in, a trace of disbelief appeared in his eyes. Then, the coldness on his body dissipated and he rushed into Xiao Chen's arms with tears in his eyes. Qin Shura thought that Xiao Chen was already dead. Now that he saw Xiao Chen alive and well in front of him, one could imagine how emotional Qin Shura was. The reunion of husband and wife was supposed to be an extremely heartwarming scene. However, it was a pity that there were always some people who didn't know what was good for them and hugged Xiao Chen and Qin Shuru. Wang Qingfeng was furious. He strode over to Xiao Chen and shouted coldly. "Who are you? Let go of junior sister Shui Rou." Qin Shuru didn't immediately recognize Xiao Chen's identity. When he heard Wang Qingfeng's words, his face darkened and he immediately wanted to deal with this bastard. The coldness that made people tremble in fear once again spread out. Fortunately, Xiao Chen gently patted her back and spoke first. "Senior sister, you don't have to worry about such a small matter. Moreover, I still have some questions to ask this person. Leave him to me." She didn't let Qin Shuru make a move. When he heard Xiao Chen's words, Qin Shuru nodded obediently. The coldness on his body quickly dissipated and he took the initiative to retreat behind Xiao Chen. He was extremely obedient. Xiao Chen smiled and temporarily put away the joy of being reunited with Qin Shuru. She slowly took a step forward and looked at Wang Qingfeng indifferently. "Who am I? Am I not the dead man that you mentioned just now?" You're Xiao Chen. You're not dead." Wang Qingfeng naturally wasn't stupid and quickly guessed Xiao Chen's identity. Hearing this, Xiao Chen smiled, but it was a very cold smile. Without saying a word, he came in front of Wang Qingfeng and threw a slap. Then, a bright red handprint appeared on Wang Qingfeng's face. However, the slap wasn't over yet. Xiao Chen kicked out again and directly sent Wang Qingfeng flying. There was no way for Wang Qingfeng to fight back. Although Wang Qingfeng's cultivation was at the perfect mysterious Yuan stage, he wasn't a heaven's pride. His combat strength was far inferior to Xiao Chen's. Therefore, even though his cultivation was one stage higher than Xiao Chen's, Xiao Chen was still able to easily defeat him. Xiao Chen didn't even use his spiritual energy. He only used his physical strength to defeat Wang Qingfeng. After dealing with Wang Qingfeng with a slap and a kick, Xiao Chen slowly walked to the main seat and sat down. He looked down at Wang Qingfeng, whose cheeks were red and swollen, and blood was dripping from the corner of his mouth. "Get over here." Previously, Wang Qingfeng didn't put Xiao Chen in his eyes, but now, he had personally experienced Xiao Chen's terrifying strength. Xiao Chen didn't even use his spiritual energy. He only used his physical strength to defeat Wang Qingfeng. This showed how strong Xiao Chen was. Wang Qingfeng obeyed and came in front of Xiao Chen. He was completely terrified. A person like him was a weakling. Once he met someone stronger than him, he would immediately be defeated. "You said that the Prison Flame Peak Master was going to destroy the Sky Sword Peak. Tell me, how is he going to destroy my Sky Sword Peak? Also, which of the other Peak Masters are working with him?" Xiao Chen looked at Wang Qingfeng and asked indifferently. To be honest, Xiao Chen wasn't interested in Wang Qingfeng at all. If it weren't for the words that Wang Qingfeng said, Xiao Chen would have already thrown him out. After hearing Xiao Chen's question, Wang Qingfeng's expression changed instantly. In fact, he only heard about these things from hearsay. He didn't know the inside story at all, so he couldn't answer Xiao Chen's question at all. With a bitter expression, Wang Qingfeng said with a mournful face, "Senior Xiao Chen, I made all these up." Oh, you made it up? I don't think so. There's no smoke without fire. If you didn't have such thoughts, why would you say such things? But since you don't want to say it, then forget it. I don't have time to ask you. Xiao Chen chuckled. Wang Qingfeng was overjoyed. Is Xiao Chen going to let me go? Wang Qingfeng thought that Xiao Chen was going to let him go, but what Xiao Chen said in the next second made Wang Qingfeng completely panic. Xiao Chen said to Qing Yao and Qing Luo, who had rushed over after hearing about the situation. "Qing Luo, get an elder here." Tell him that I have something to tell him. Xiaochen looked at Wang Qingfeng and said, I'm not interested in testing you, but I believe that the elders of my Sky Sword Peak will be interested and have plenty of time. Chapter 132. Xiaochen guessed that Wang Qingfeng must have heard the news because the peak leader of the prison Flame Peak wouldn't tell him such an important thing. Therefore, Xiaochen didn't pay much attention to him. But just like what Xiaochen had said, there was no smoke without fire. Since Wang Qingfeng had heard the news, it proved that it was likely to be true. After all, the peak leader of the Sky Sword Peak, Sang Feng, had been forced away by the peak leader of the prison Flame Peak back then and had almost lost his life. Because of that, the peak leader of the prison Flame Peak was the one who hated the most now that the Sky Sword Peak had reappeared. Shortly after, an elder of the Sky Sword Peak hurried over after Qing Luo informed him. Xiaochen bowed to the elder and said, I've captured a disciple of the prison Flame Peak. I heard from him that. Xiaochen explained everything to the elder. The elder's expression changed drastically. This wasn't a small matter. If that was the case, the Sky Sword Peak would be in danger. After all, the Sky Sword Peak was still too weak. They weren't a match for the prison Flame Peak at all. One had to know that the Sky Sword Peak didn't even have a Dao King Realm cultivator, let alone a Dao Sovereign. Without sufficient strength, even if the ruler of the continent of the Nine Clouds was present, it was difficult to guarantee that nothing would go wrong. Therefore, the elder's expression turned grave after hearing the news. Seeing this, Xiaochen smiled and said, Elder, you don't have to worry too much. Even if the prison Flame Peak really wants to do this, they definitely won't dare to do it openly. Therefore, my Sky Sword Peak also has the ability to deal with them. The main reason I asked you to come is to let you bring this person to see Master and see how Master will deal with him. However, even if I don't get any valuable information from him, I still can't let him go easily. Don't you agree, Elder? Xiaochen's words seemed to be comforting, but it was also an order. The elder wasn't stupid and immediately understood what Xiaochen meant. He glanced at Wang Qingfeng coldly. He knew that he wouldn't be able to get anything out of Wang Qingfeng. However, Xiaochen's purpose was to torture him. As a result, Wang Qingfeng would probably experience a torment worse than death. The elder nodded respectfully and said, The Peak Master and the others have been in closed-door cultivation for most of the time. How about this, young Master? I will take this person away. I will not disappoint young Master. With the support of sufficient resources, Sang Xian and the other two had been doing their best to break through to the Dao transformation stage during this period of time. Although it would be difficult to achieve in a short period of time, the three of them had to work hard. Therefore, the three of them rarely came out of seclusion unless something major happened. Wang Qingfeng's matter was just a small matter, and this elder was naturally competent. Hearing his words, Xiaochen nodded in satisfaction. He thought to himself that this old man was really smart, but on the surface, he still spoke with a calm expression. Then I'll have to trouble Elder. This person coveted Shuru's beauty and tried to take advantage of her when I wasn't around. I'm very angry. I hope Elder can teach him a lesson. Although Xiaochen didn't seem to care, Wang Qingfeng would definitely lose a layer of skin if he didn't die. The elder's face immediately sank and a cold light flickered in his eyes as he looked at Wang Qingfeng. Then, he respectfully promised Xiaochen. Young Master, don't worry. I guarantee that this person will never appear in front of young Master again, nor will he dare to take a step into the Heavenly Sword Peak. Okay, then I'll have to trouble Elder. Xiaochen smiled. Subsequently, Wang Qingfeng was taken away by the elder in extreme fear. As for what would happen to Wang Qingfeng, it was none of Xiaochen's business. With Xiaochen's prestige and status in the Heavenly Sword Peak, no one in the Heavenly Sword Peak would dare to disobey his orders. After settling Wang Qingfeng's matter, Xiaochen finally had time to properly talk to Qin Shuru. After being separated for a few months, the news of Xiaochen's death came. One could imagine how worried Qin Shuru was. The two of them held hands as Qin Shuru led Xiaochen around the dustless residence. he discovered that the dustless residence was exactly the same as when he was in the Eastern Sword Pavilion. Obviously, Chinshuru had built this place based on the dustless residence in the Eastern Sword Pavilion. Feeling warm in their hearts, the two of them also told each other about their experiences in the past few months. Xiaochen did not hide anything from Chinshuru. He directly told Chinshuru about him, Chenling, and Long Qin becoming sworn brothers. After chatting for about 6 hours, Xiaochen suddenly remembered why Chinshuru's body was so cold. He carefully examined Chinshuru's body and did not find any abnormalities. Finally, Xiaochen asked Chinshuru to release the cold so that he could observe it carefully. It had to be said that Chinshuru's cold was difficult for Xiaochen to resist. It was as if his entire body was about to freeze. This was definitely not an ordinary cold. After personally experiencing Chinshuru's terrifying cold, Xiaochen thought to himself. He did not understand why Chinshuru possessed such a terrifying cold. Unable to find the reason, he could only conclude that it was because of his Yin soul constitution. However, what puzzled Xiaochen was that although the Yin soul constitution was a special constitution, was it really that strong? After entering the central divine realm, Xiaochen's horizons had been broadened. The Yin soul constitution might be rare in the Eastern Sun region, but it was nothing in the central divine realm. Compared to his heavenly sword embryo, the Yin soul constitution was a special constitution that could not be more ordinary. Logically speaking, it should not be able to produce such a powerful cold. Chinshuru's cold made Xiaochen very puzzled. Seeing this, Chinshuru comforted him gently, "Don't worry, husband. Although I don't know how this cold is produced, it is not harmful to me at all. Therefore, you don't have to worry about it." He gestured to Xiaochen not to worry too much. Hearing this, Xiaochen could only nod silently. Indeed, since it was not harmful to Chinshuru's body, he did not need to worry too much about it. Moreover, with this cold, Chinshuru's strength was absolutely terrifying. This was also the reason why Chinshuru rarely showed himself in public. Otherwise, with this cold, Chinshuru would definitely be ranked among the top skyprides. This was because Xiaochen believed that people like Yao Changqing would never be able to withstand Chinshuru's cold. No longer worrying about the cold, Xiaochen turned to look at Chinshuru. Chinshuru was an outstanding beauty. Her teeth were bright and her beauty outshone the moon and flowers. It seemed that every time he saw Chinshuru, she would become more beautiful than before. If Chinshuru was said to be devastatingly beautiful in Eastern Sun region, then she could be described as charming now. Completely attracted by Chinshuru's beauty, Chinshuru lowered his head shyly in the face of Xiaochen's burning gaze. Seeing this, Xiaochen laughed heartily. Then, he picked Chinshuru up by the waist and walked directly into the house. With such a beauty in his arms, what else was there to say? Chapter 133. After a wild night with Chinshuru, Xiaochen spent the next few days in seclusion. On one hand, he enjoyed Chinshuru's gentleness. On the other hand, he began to practice the nine-heaven sword finger that Chenling had imparted to him. It was indeed an extremely heaven-defying martial skill. Although Xiaochen did not know what grade the nine-heaven sword finger was, he was certain that it was far beyond a Tian-tier martial skill. He began to practice the nine-heaven sword finger. Of course, Xiaochen did not slack off when it came to practicing basic sword techniques. At present, Xiaochen had mastered a total of 68 basic sword techniques. The firmness of his foundation was unimaginable. After all, it was rare for a person to master so many basic sword techniques. However, this was far from Xiaochen's goal. Knowing the importance of a good foundation, Xiaochen knew that the 68 basic sword techniques he had mastered were far from enough. The days passed by peacefully and meaningfully. Xiaochen spent most of his time cultivating himself. At present, Heavenly Sword Peak was in a very precarious situation. Amongst the 9 peaks of 9 Firmament's palace, Heavenly Sword Peak was like a castle in the sky. It could collapse at any moment. In order to prevent that from happening, the only thing Xiaochen could rely on was his own strength. To put it bluntly, Tianjian Peak did not have enough strength. If they did, it would not be so easy for Prison Flame Peak to destroy Tianjian Peak. Of course, Xiaochen was not very useful in protecting Tianjian Peak. After all, no matter how talented he was, Xiaochen was still too young. It would take a long time for him to fully mature. Thus, Tianjian Peak urgently needed an expert who could control the situation. At the very least, they had to be comparable to the peak lords of the other 8 peaks. Such a person had to be at least a Dao sovereign. However, how could a Dao sovereign come to Tianjian Peak? Judging from the current situation, Tianjian Peak did not have any good ideas. Their only hope was the ruler of the continent of the 9 firmaments. However, even with the ruler of the continent of the 9 firmaments, it was impossible to guard against Prison Flame Peak's secret tricks. He was well aware of the Heavenly Sword Peak's current situation. But that night, when Xiaochen was called to his residence by Tsangxian, Xiaochen heard even worse news from Tsangxian. It was less than 10 days away from returning to the Heavenly Sword Peak. On this night, Tsangxian rarely came out of seclusion and immediately called for Xiaochen. The master and disciple sat opposite each other. Tsangxian first asked about Xiaochen's situation, and then asked about it. "Chen'er, what do you think of the Sky Sword Peak's current situation?" He took the initiative to ask Xiaochen what he thought of the difficulties facing the Heavenly Sword Peak. Upon hearing this, Xiaochen frowned and asked, "Master, did something happen?" Tsangxian keenly sensed that the Heavenly Sword Peak's situation wasn't as optimistic as he thought. Upon hearing Xiaochen's question, Tsangxian didn't beat around the bush and nodded with a solemn expression. "I already know about Wang Qingfeng. He's right. The new Prison Flame Peak Master doesn't intend to let the Heavenly Sword Peak off, and has already taken action. Ever since the incident back then was exposed, the previous Prison Flame Peak Master had mysteriously disappeared. However, a peak couldn't be without a leader for a day, and soon, a Prison Flame Peak Master took over the Prison Flame Peak. But this new Prison Flame Peak Master clearly didn't intend to let the Heavenly Sword Peak off. Perhaps there were still some secrets that outsiders didn't know about. The only thing that could be confirmed was that the new Prison Flame Peak Master had already begun to take action against the Heavenly Sword Peak. Thereafter, from Tsangxian's explanation, Xiaochen completely understood the current situation of the Heavenly Sword Peak. The reality was much more dangerous than Xiaochen had imagined. Firstly, the Prison Flame Peak Master did not openly take action against the Heavenly Sword Peak. But 2 months ago, the Prison Flame Peak had joined forces with the 100 Shadow Peak to send over 1,000 disciples to the Heavenly Sword Peak. In the name of raising the overall strength of the Heavenly Sword Peak, these 1,000 disciples were indeed now under the Heavenly Sword Peak's name. However, the Sky Sword Peak shouldn't think that it was the Sky Sword Peak that had profited. Because at the same time that these 1,000 disciples were assigned to the Sky Sword Peak, Prison Flame Peak had also sent a Dao King Realm Head Elder to the Sky Sword Peak. There were also several Dao Transformation Realm and Dao Gate Realm Elders and Deacons. These people had forcefully entered the Heavenly Sword Peak. It was obvious that the Prison Flame Peak wanted to swallow the Heavenly Sword Peak and let the Prison Flame Peak's people control the Heavenly Sword Peak. From destruction to annexation, the nature of this was even worse. But the Heavenly Sword Peak couldn't do anything about it. The entire Heavenly Sword Peak was now completely divided into 2 factions. One faction was the orthodox Heavenly Sword Peak led by the Tsangxian Trio, while the other faction was the disciples of the other 2 peaks led by the Prison Flame Peak Chief Elder. The 2 factions fought openly and covertly. Of course, in terms of absolute strength, Tsangxian's group was much weaker. Fortunately, this was 9 Firmaments Palace and the people from the Prison Flame Peak did not dare to be too brazen. Even so, the wild ambitions of the Prison Flame Peak had been completely exposed. In fact, the Prison Flame Peak Master had already contacted the other peaks and proposed to hold a chief disciple competition for the Heavenly Sword Peak in order to completely seize control of the Heavenly Sword Peak. Once the chief disciple of the Heavenly Sword Peak fell into the hands of the Prison Flame Peak faction, the Heavenly Sword Peak would definitely fall into the hands of the Prison Flame Peak. In this way, the orthodox Heavenly Sword Peak like Zhangxian would definitely be suppressed. When that happened, the Heavenly Sword Peak would only exist in name and would become a subsidiary of the Prison Flame Peak. After hearing Zhangxian's words, a cold light flashed in Xiao Chen's eyes. He never imagined that the Prison Flame Peak would be so insidious. They did not leave any way out for the Heavenly Sword Peak and wanted to force the Heavenly Sword Peak into a dead end. The Chief Disciple competition required one to be at the Heaven-Human stage at the very least. Once the competition began, no one in his faction would be able to put up a fight. Even Qin Heng, the one with the highest cultivation, was only at the perfect Earth-Clear stage. How could he compete for the Chief Disciple position? They had already lost before the fight. Seeing the ugly expression on Xiao Chen's face, Zhangxian sighed softly and said, "Today, the ruler gathered the 9 peak lords to discuss this matter. In the end, he decided to give the Heavenly Sword Peak 2 more years. After 2 years, the Chief Disciple competition will begin. This is the ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds giving us time." Zhangxian had come out of seclusion today because the ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds had summoned him. The matter of the Heavenly Sword Peak Chief Disciple competition had already been decided. The ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds stood his ground and gave the Heavenly Sword Peak 2 years' time. As for whether the Heavenly Sword Peak could win the Chief Disciple competition after 2 years, that would depend on themselves. This was what the ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds had personally said to Zhangxian. 2 years' time. After hearing Zhangxian's words, determination quickly emerged in Xiao Chen's eyes. He was at the perfect mysterious Yuan stage. Would he be able to break through to the Heaven-Human stage in 2 years? The time was still a little too short. However, there was no way out. He could only fight with his life on the line. When he saw the change in Xiao Chen's expression, Zhangxian nodded in gratification. "Chener, I told you this today because I hope that you will be able to win the Chief Disciple position in 2 years. You must not let the Prison Flame Peak succeed." Chapter 134. Only 2 years was a very short time, but Zhangxian had no choice. He could only place his hopes on Xiao Chen. Although Qin Heng and the other core disciples already had the cultivation of the Earth Mirror Realm and would definitely break through to the Heaven Realm within 2 years, it was still far from enough. Their battle strength was still lacking. Therefore, in the entire Sky Sword Peak, only Xiao Chen had the hope of stopping the Prison Flame Peak. Of course, all of this was based on the premise that Xiao Chen could break through to the Heaven Realm within 2 years. Without the cultivation of the Heaven Realm, all of this was just empty talk. From Zhangxian's words, Xiao Chen could feel a touch of seriousness and helplessness. There was indeed no other way. All of the pressure could only be placed on Xiao Chen's shoulders. Only Xiao Chen could bear this pressure. He nodded solemnly. To break through to the Heaven Realm within 2 years was definitely impossible for ordinary people. However, Xiao Chen had the disposition of a proud king. 2 years should be enough. Zhangxian truthfully told Xiao Chen the situation of the Sky Sword Peak. At the same time, he also said that Xiao Chen could freely use all of the cultivation resources of the Sky Sword Peak during these 2 years. As long as Xiao Chen could quickly raise his cultivation base, everything would be worth it. A disciple could use all of the cultivation resources of the Sky Sword Peak. How much power was this? At the same time, it also meant that the Sky Sword Peak was really betting everything on Xiao Chen. If Xiao Chen won, the Sky Sword Peak would definitely rise. If Xiao Chen lost, the Sky Sword Peak would be consigned to eternal damnation. After chatting with Zhangxian for more than 4 hours, Xiao Chen returned to the dustless residence. Since he could use all of the cultivation resources of the Sky Sword Peak, Xiao Chen also planned to go to the Sky Sword Hall to take a look. The Sky Sword Hall was the place where the Sky Sword Peak stored all kinds of treasured swords. Xiao Chen naturally went there for the Heavenly Sword Embryo. He would choose a batch of suitable treasured swords to feed the Heavenly Sword Embryo so that it could grow faster. After a silent night, early the next morning, Xiaochen practiced the 9 heavens sword finger once. In just 10 days, Xiaochen had already mastered the first finger of the 9 heavens sword finger. Just as he was about to leave for the Heavenly Sword Hall, the main elder of the prison Flame Peak came to visit him personally. His name was Zhao Lu, and his cultivation was at the initial Dao King stage. He was once the chief elder of the prison Flame Peak, but he was now the chief elder of the Sky Sword Peak. He was on par with the Zhangxian trio, and had formed his own faction in the Sky Sword Peak. He was eyeing the position of Peak Master of the Sky Sword Peak covetously. He never had any contact with Zhao Lu, but he took the initiative to visit today. After pondering for a moment, Xiaochen still asked Qing Luo to bring him to the main hall. In the main hall, Xiaochen finally saw the new Sky Sword Peak Master Elder. He was middle-aged and had an ordinary appearance. However, his eyes were extremely sharp. Anyone who could become a Dao King stage expert naturally couldn't be a simple person. He sized up Zhao Lu, and at the same time, Zhao Lu was also sizing up Xiaochen, the famous King of Prides. Due to the incident in the city of the Medicine King, the news that Xiaochen was still alive had already spread throughout the Central Earth Divine region. Moreover, Xiaochen was now ranked among the top 10 King of Prides again. Moreover, the latest edition of the Heavens Pride ranking had already published Xiaochen's life in detail. Through the Heavens Pride ranking, the world could clearly and directly understand the growth process of this King of Prides. This was a change in the outside world. Of course, Xiaochen wasn't the slightest bit interested in this. These were all false reputations. The two exchanged glances. In the end, Zhao Lu was the first to speak. Zhao Lu laughed heartily and said enthusiastically, "Ha, you're indeed a talent. As expected of a disciple of my Sky Sword Peak. With such a disciple in my Sky Sword Peak, why should I worry about not soaring into the sky?" He didn't show any hostility. On the contrary, he was very enthusiastic. Hearing Zhao Lu's words, Xiaochen replied calmly, "Head Elder, may I know why you've come today?" "Nothing much. I just heard that you've returned safely, so I've come to take a look," replied Zhao Lu. "Oh, since that's the case, I have other matters to attend to. Please excuse me." Zhao Lu had only come to visit him. Who would believe that? However, since he didn't say anything, Xiaochen naturally wouldn't ask. After all, nothing good comes out of a dog's mouth. He immediately turned around and prepared to leave. He didn't show any mercy. Seeing this, a cold light flashed through Zhao Lu's eyes. However, it was only a flash. Then, he withdrew his smile and said indifferently, "Xiaochen, don't be in such a hurry. I've indeed come to find you today for a matter. Your talent is rare in this world. The prison Flame Peak Lord thinks highly of you. Today, I've come to tell you that as long as you agree to join the prison Flame Peak, the Peak Lord will definitely not treat you unfairly. In the future, you will definitely soar to the sky. How about it?" Without further ado, Zhao Lu directly stated his purpose. It was obvious that he had come today to rope in Xiaochen. As one of the 10 prides of the Heavenly Qin continent, Xiaochen's talent was unquestionable. Even the prison Flame Peak Lord was fond of him. However, towards the prison Flame Peak's attempt to rope him in, Xiaochen coldly smiled. "Then I'll thank the prison Flame Peak Lord. However, it's a pity that I haven't had much luck since I was young. I'm afraid I'll have to disappoint the prison Flame Peak." Without the slightest hesitation, he directly rejected the offer. Hearing this, Zhao Lu unhurriedly said, "Xiaochen, you better think this through. You won't have a good ending if you stay in the Sky Sword Peak. It's not enough for a person to just have talent. You must have enough cultivation resources as support. You should be a smart person and know what I mean. There's no need to ruin yourself for the sake of the Sky Sword Peak." There wasn't much anger in his voice. However, the threat in his words was self-evident. Threatening Xiaochen. Hearing this, Xiaochen suddenly burst into laughter. "Ha, from what you've said, the prison Flame Peak has already eaten up my Sky Sword Peak. Originally, the various grudges between the prison Flame Peak and the Sky Sword Peak had nothing to do with me. This time, if the Prison Flame Peak could calmly accept the return of the Sky Sword Peak, I definitely wouldn't find trouble with the Prison Flame Peak. However, it's a pity that the Prison Flame Peak doesn't leave us any way out. Since that's the case, don't blame me. As for my future, there's no need for Lord Elder to worry about it. After speaking, Xiaochen directly turned around and left. The moment Xiaochen stepped out of the main hall, Zhao Lu coldly said, "All right, since that's the case, then hand over Wang Qingfeng. He's a disciple of the Prison Flame Peak." Xiaochen was determined not to join the Prison Flame Peak. This was something that Zhao Lu already understood. Since that was the case, he would return Wang Qingfeng. After all, Wang Qingfeng was a disciple of the Prison Flame Peak. Now that he had been captured by Xiaochen, if the Prison Flame Peak didn't give an explanation, it would obviously be an extremely humiliating matter. Therefore, Zhao Lu had two tasks today. One was to rope in Xiaochen, but unfortunately, he failed. As for the other, it was to ask for Wang Qingfeng. Please collect, recommend, reward. Chapter 135. Understanding that it was impossible to recruit Xiaochen, Zhao Lu gave up on the idea. Instead, he turned to Xiaochen to ask for Wang Qingfeng. Hearing Zhao Lu's words, Xiaochen paused. Then, he turned around and said coolly, "Wang Qingfeng made a small mistake. I will teach him a lesson. Don't worry, I won't kill him. Once he learns his lesson, I will release him back to Prison Flame Peak." Wang Qingfeng had dared to harass Qin Shuru while he was away. Naturally, Xiaochen would not let him off so easily. As for Prison Flame Peak, Xiaochen was not afraid. This was Nine Firmament's palace. There were some rules that had to be followed. Prison Flame Peak dared not do anything openly. He also dared not report this matter to the ruler of the Nine Firmaments. Truth was on Xiaochen's side. If the ruler of the Nine Firmaments palace found out about this, Wang Qingfeng's fate would be even more miserable. After saying that, Xiaochen did not wait for Zhao Lu to reply. Instead, he simply walked away. Zhao Lu, who was behind him, said furiously, "Fine. Fine. Fine. Xiaochen, you chose this. Don't regret it." Clearly, Zhao Lu had been thoroughly infuriated by Xiaochen's attitude. It was one thing for Xiaochen to refuse Prison Flame Peak's offer, but Xiaochen had actually refused to give him face when it came to Wang Qingfeng. Even with Zhao Lu's temperament, he was infuriated. A Dao King was infuriated. If this were outside, Xiaochen would have a headache. However, this was Nine Firmament's palace. There were some rules that even Zhao Lu had to abide by. Not to mention, Xiaochen was a proud king, someone highly regarded by the ruler of the Nine Firmament's palace. No matter how infuriated Zhao Lu was, he would not dare openly attack Xiaochen. At most, he would secretly try to trip Xiaochen up. Due to the rules, Zhao Lu's threat was greatly reduced. Naturally, this was not a long-term solution. After leaving the immaculate residence, Xiaochen sighed. Sigh. It's all about strength. Zhao Lu is a Dao King. Master and the others are simply incapable of fighting him head-on. Even if they can rely on Nine Firmament's palace's rules to stabilize the situation for now, they are still in a disadvantageous position. He was well aware that the root cause of all this was because his side did not have enough strength. The Prison Flame Peak only needed to send a single chief elder to suppress Zhang Xian and the others until they could hardly breathe. However, there was nothing he could do. There were no shortcuts on the path of cultivation. He could only take it one step at a time. Xiaochen stopped thinking about these things, because it was useless to think about it. The most important task for Xiaochen now was to raise his cultivation level to the celestial realm within 2 years. As for other things, there was no way he could think about them for the time being. Since Xiaochen had come directly to the Heavenly Sword Hall, he must have received Zhang Xian's order, so the elders in charge of guarding the Heavenly Sword Hall did not stop him. However, the elders of Zhao Lu's faction were not so easy to talk to. Due to Zhao Lu's presence, the various halls of Heavenly Sword Peak had been filled with his men. After being stopped by the elders in Zhao Lu's faction, Xiao Chen's face gradually turned cold. I have my master's orders. I can enter and leave Heavenly Sword Hall as I please. What? Are you trying to stop me? I don't know what you are talking about. I only know that without Elder Zhao's orders, I cannot let you enter Heavenly Sword Hall, the elder said coolly when he heard Xiao Chen's words. He only obeyed Zhao Lu's orders and could not enter Heavenly Sword Hall. At the same time, Zhao Lu also received news that Xiao Chen was heading to Heavenly Sword Hall. He sneered and immediately ordered the elders in his faction that without his orders, Xiao Chen was not allowed to take a single step into Heavenly Sword Hall. Didn't Xiao Chen say that the outcome of the chief disciple selection would be decided in 2 years? Fine, then I will cut off your cultivation resources. Without the support of cultivation resources, let's see how you cultivate. Xiao Chen was forbidden from entering Heavenly Sword Hall. At the same time, Zhang Xian was also furious when he received the news. He did not expect Zhao Lu to be so excessive. He angrily rushed to Zhao Lu's residence. As soon as he entered, Zhang Xian coldly shouted, Zhao Lu, what is the meaning of this? Oh, Peak Master, what's wrong? I didn't do anything. Zhao Lu sneered in response to Zhang Xian's angry shout. Nothing. I ordered Xiao Chen to enter Heavenly Sword Hall. Why did you order your people to stop him? Said Zhang Xian. Oh, so that's what you want. Peak Master, you don't know. Xiao Chen is just a disciple. According to the rules, if he wants to enter Heavenly Sword Hall, he must have enough contribution points. Unfortunately, he doesn't. What I did was right, right? Said Zhao Lu. Zhang Xian deliberately pretended to be confused. However, he knew very well what Zhao Lu was thinking. He wanted to cut off Xiao Chen's cultivation resources. Today it was Heavenly Sword Hall, tomorrow it could be Martial Skills Hall. Without cultivation resources, no matter how talented Xiao Chen was, he could not break through to the Heaven Human stage in 2 years. Zhang Xian looked coldly at Zhao Lu. He did not want to waste time talking nonsense with him and directly shouted coldly. Zhao Lu, I can tolerate other things, but if you dare to attack Xiao Chen, don't blame me. I will ask you one last time, are you going to step aside or not? It was impossible for Zhang Xian to step aside. If Zhao Lu didn't step aside, Zhang Xian would not be afraid even if the ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds heard about it. Zhao Lu was helpless when he saw Zhang Xian's crazy expression. He was forced to join Heavenly Sword Peak by the Peak Master of Prison Flame Peak, but the current Peak Master of Heavenly Sword Peak was Zhang Xian and the other 2. Therefore, Zhang Xian's words were orders in Heavenly Sword Peak. What Zhao Lu had done was, frankly speaking, offending his superiors. In the past, because his cultivation level was higher than Zhang Xian and the other 2, Zhang Xian and the other 2 would tolerate him, but this matter had obviously touched Zhang Xian's bottom line. And if Zhang Xian directly reported this matter to the ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds, Zhao Lu would not be able to explain himself. After all, he was only a chief elder in name, while Zhang Xian was the Peak Master of Heavenly Sword Peak. If he openly disobeyed a Peak Master's orders, he would be punished. After remaining silent for a while, Zhao Lu said, All right, I promise not to obstruct Xiao Chen, but you can only give Xiao Chen the cultivation resources of your faction. As for the cultivation resources of our faction, you can't touch Xiao Chen. That's the bottom line. If you don't agree, go ahead and cause trouble. Even if the ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds hears about it, I'll say the same thing. The Sky Sword Peak was now divided into 2 factions. As such, the cultivation resources were naturally divided into 2 pieces. The 2 factions each had 1 piece. They could not obstruct Xiao Chen, but Zhang Xian could only give the cultivation resources of his faction to Xiao Chen. Zhang Xian ground his teeth when he heard that, but there was nothing he could do. His faction was inferior to Zhao Lu's. It was already rare and precious to be able to obtain half of the cultivation resources for Xiao Chen. Zhao Lu, you and your prison flame peak will definitely regret this. said Sang Xian coldly, looking at Zhao Lu. Then, Sang Xian turned around and left. He could only obtain half of the cultivation resources for Xiao Chen. Sang Xian was furious. Please add, recommend, reward. Chapter 136. In the end, Xiao Chen was able to obtain ordinary cultivation resources. After learning this news, Xiao Chen didn't show too much disappointment. This was the reality, and it was already commendable that Sang Xian could achieve this. After reaching an agreement with Zhao Lu, Xiao Chen successfully entered the Heavenly Sword Hall. After strolling around the Heavenly Sword Hall, Xiao Chen finally chose 20 mysterious weapons to take away. Taking away so many mysterious weapons at once, although the elders of the Sang Xian faction were puzzled, they didn't say anything. On the way back from the Heavenly Sword Hall to the Dustless Residence, Xiao Chen immediately began to devour swords. After devouring 3 mysterious swords in a row, the Heavenly Sword embryo stopped moving. I'm full? Looking at the Heavenly Sword embryo that no longer devoured, Xiao Chen softly muttered to himself. It seemed that the Heavenly Sword embryo had a limit to the number of swords it could devour at a time. It was just that he didn't know how long it would take for the Heavenly Sword embryo to digest after such a full meal. Since the Heavenly Sword embryo no longer devoured swords, Xiao Chen planned to go to the sword room to cultivate. The sword room was a cultivation treasure of the Heavenly Sword Peak. It was created by the previous peak master of the Heavenly Sword Peak, Sang Feng, and was divided into 2 levels. The first was the Sword Chi Room, which could produce Sword Chi from the beginner level all the way to the perfect level. Above the Sword Chi Room was the Sword Intent Room, which could produce Sword Intent. Of course, for the current Xiao Chen, he didn't need the Sword Intent Room, but the Sword Chi Room had too many benefits for him. Not only could it temper his spiritual power, it could help him break through faster, but it could also help his Sword Chi break through. To enter the Sword Chi Room to cultivate, he called Qin Shuru, and the two headed in the direction of the Sword Room. Along the way, the disciples of the Sang Xian faction all respectfully bowed to Xiao Chen when they saw him, but the disciples of Zhao Lu's faction were clearly filled with hostility. At the same time, their gazes towards Qin Shuru were filled with bestial lust, which made Xiao Chen very unhappy. Sensing the growing coldness from Xiao Chen, Qin Shuru held Xiao Chen's arm and gently consoled, "Husband, a little impatience will spoil great plans. The chief disciple selection in 2 years is the most important." Upon hearing Qin Shuru's words, Xiao Chen nodded, and the two arrived at the sword room. There were a total of 68 sword rooms, 50 of which were Sword Chi rooms, and 18 were Sword Intent rooms. After informing the elders in charge, the elders of Zhao Lu's faction didn't stop Xiao Chen this time, and allowed the elders of the Sang Xian faction to open 2 Sword Chi rooms for him. Ordinary disciples needed to pay contribution points to enter the Sword Chi rooms, but Xiao Chen didn't need to. At the same time, there was no time limit. As long as Xiao Chen could endure, he could stay in the Sword Chi rooms for as long as he wanted. Because of Xiao Chen, Qin Shuru also enjoyed the same heaven-defying treatment. The two entered 2 connected Sword Chi rooms one after the other. The layout of the rooms was very simple. In the secret room, which was only 5 or 6 square meters in size, there was only a bare futon placed in the center. There was no need to manually control it. The Sword Chi in the Sword Chi rooms would be adjusted according to the level of the person who entered. In other words, if Xiao Chen had advanced perfection level Sword Chi, then the Sword Chi emitted from the Sword Chi rooms would be at the advanced perfection level. Through the endless Sword Chi of the advanced perfection level, Xiao Chen's spiritual power, physical body, and Sword Chi were constantly refined. In such an environment, cultivation was naturally twice the result with half the effort. However, everything had its pros and cons, because the Sword Chi wouldn't stop unless one walked out of the Sword Chi room. Therefore, the time one could stay in the Sword Chi room was extremely limited. In the records of the entire Tianjian Peak, the person who stayed in the Sword Chi room for the longest time only lasted for 3 days. Sitting cross-legged on the futon, a fierce Sword Chi soared into the sky from the Sword Chi room. It had obviously reached the advanced perfection level. The sword qi whistled and penetrated Xiao Chen's body through his pores. Under the condensation of the sword qi, Xiao Chen's spiritual power, meridians, physical body, and sword qi were all constantly growing. It was not easy to resist the sword qi, but Xiao Chen's physical body had become stronger after being nourished by the blood pill. Compared to others, Xiao Chen was very relaxed at this moment. The corner of his mouth unconsciously revealed a smile, and he sighed from the bottom of his heart, as expected of one of the 7 overlord forces. Their foundation is really strong. The sword qi room was indeed a treasured place for cultivation. Compared to the treasured places in the Eastern Sword Pavilion, the difference was simply too great. The difference was like heaven and earth. He was very satisfied with the cultivation environment of the sword qi room. While Xiao Chen entered the sword qi room, Zhao Lu came to the prison flame peak to personally meet the peak master of the prison flame peak. The new peak master of the prison flame peak was called Zhan Tianlei, and his cultivation was at the initial Dao Sovereign level. Because he had just broken through to the Dao Sovereign level, Zhan Tianlei's strength could only be considered the weakest among the 9 peak masters. Even so, it was still enough to crush the Zhangxian trio from the Tianjian peak. Dressed in a black robe, Zhan Tianlei had a feminine appearance. As the peak master of Prison Flame Peak, Zhan Tianlei still had the appearance of a young man, just like a rich young master. However, his eyes gave off an extremely sinister feeling at all times. Sitting cross-legged on a futon in the cultivation room, Zhan Tianlei looked indifferently at Zhao Lu, who had his head lowered, and slowly said, "What's the use of a proud king who can't grow? It seems that I haven't given Song Xian and the others enough pressure. I think the Tianjian peak should be more chaotic." "Zhao Lu, do you understand what I mean?" "This subordinate understands." Hearing Zhan Tianlei's words, Zhao Lu nodded respectfully. Hearing Zhao Lu's reply, Zhan Tianlei slowly closed his eyes. Then, Zhao Lu respectfully withdrew from the room. He wanted to make the Heavenly Sword Peak even more chaotic. After receiving Zhan Tianlei's instructions, Zhao Lu naturally did not dare to disobey. Unsurprisingly, the Heavenly Sword Peak fell into chaos. The source of this chaos was naturally the conflict between the disciples of the 2 sections. Although the disciples of the 2 sects didn't get along well with each other, they restrained themselves. But now, with Zhao Lu's secret instructions, the disciples of Zhao Lu's faction naturally had no more scruples. For a time, the conflict between the disciples of the 2 sects erupted, and there were fights almost every day. It was complete chaos. In just 2 days, more than 100 disciples of the 2 sects had been injured because of the conflict. As the chaos spread, the rules of the Tianjian peak were completely non-existent. It was no exaggeration to say that the disciples of the 2 sects would fight to the death whenever they met. Even the deacons of the 2 sects had several conflicts. Only the higher-ups of the 2 sects didn't have any conflicts. Faced with the increasingly chaotic situation, Song Xian and the others were burning with anger. They gathered together, and Song Long looked at Song Xian and Song Yun as he coldly shouted, "Zhao Lu is a bastard. He actually secretly instructed the disciples of his faction to have conflicts with us. If this continues, my Tianjian peak will be in complete chaos." Chapter 137. In a short span of 2 days, the Sky Sword Peak had turned into a complete mess. The 3 of them sat together in a circle. Hearing Song Long's curses, Song Yin said coldly, "Today, Zhao Lu sent someone to tell me that we should release Wang Qingfeng. Otherwise, the Prison Flame Peak will not let this matter rest. The chaos now is just the beginning. That bastard, he's talking nonsense. Who does Wang Qingfeng think he is? Does he deserve to make the Prison Flame Peak go to war?" Song Long cursed. This Wang Qingfeng is naturally just an excuse. The Prison Flame Peak will definitely not make such a big fuss over him. I believe that Zhan Tianlei was the one behind all of this. His goal is likely to be to show us who's boss and pressure chinner, forcing him to join the Prison Flame Peak. Song Xian calmly said when he heard Song Wang's curses. Such a clumsy method naturally couldn't escape Song Xian's eyes. Wang Qingfeng was just cannon fodder. But the prison flame peak had already used such a clumsy method, but Song Xian and the other two couldn't do anything. If the three of them were a little stronger, they wouldn't need to be much stronger. As long as they could take down Xiao Lu, this matter would be easily resolved. They could directly suppress Xiao Lu and the matter would naturally be resolved. However, the three of them were no match for Xiao Lu. They were not even a match for Xiao Lu. The three of them were only in the Dao Gate realm. Even if they joined forces, it was impossible for them to defeat Xiao Lu. In this way, even if they had seen through everything, they had no ability to stop it. In the end, Song Yin suggested, "Why don't we go and find the Lord Ruler?" He wanted to talk to the ruler of the continent of the 9 clouds, but when he heard that, Song Xian shook his head and said, "Even though the ruler can solve the problem easily, it's Celestial Sword Peak's problem. If the three of us can't even solve it, and the ruler has to get involved, what do you think the ruler will think? Will the three of us still be fit to be the peak masters of the Heavenly Sword Peak? If we do that, I'm afraid we won't even need to wait for the chief disciple selection in 2 years." They couldn't find the Lord Ruler of the 9 clouds. As the saying goes, don't wash your dirty linen in public. If they went to the Lord Ruler of the 9 clouds for such a small matter, it would only prove that the three of them weren't capable enough to manage the Heavenly Sword Peak. Then what should we do? We can't do this, we can't do that. Are we supposed to just watch? Song Xian's words angered Azure Dragon. Sigh, let's take it one step at a time. Xiao Lu doesn't dare to make a big deal out of this. Let's wait and see. Song Xian sighed. The three of them had no other way. Xiaochen didn't know anything about the outside world. It had been 3 days since he entered the Sword Chi room. At this time, many disciples of Xiao Lu's faction had gathered around the Sword Chi room. Needless to say, their purpose was obviously to find trouble with Xiaochen. The disciples of the two factions were already in constant conflict. Under such circumstances, if they could defeat or even humiliate the representative of the Zhengshuan faction, Xiaochen, it would definitely be a huge blow to the Zhengshuan faction's morale. Hence, the crowd was stubbornly waiting for Xiaochen to emerge from his secluded cultivation. There was no need to doubt Xiaochen's reputation among the Zhengshuan faction's disciples. Therefore, as long as they defeated Xiaochen, it would definitely be a huge blow to the Zhengshuan faction's morale. It's been 3 days. He seems to have broken the record, right? One of the disciples whispered as he looked at the Sword Chi room Xiaochen was in. Yes, it has indeed been 3 days. Xiaochen had been in the Sword Chi room for 3 days. Even the disciples of Xiao Lu's faction were a little shocked by his performance. He had already broken the record of the Sword Chi room. They really didn't know how Xiaochen did it. They were stubbornly guarding Xiaochen. While the crowd was whispering because Xiaochen had broken the record, the door of the Sword Chi room next to Xiaochen's room slowly opened, and Qin Shuru, dressed in a green long skirt, slowly walked out. She glanced at the Sword Chi room Xiaochen was in, but the door was still closed. It was obvious that Xiaochen was still cultivating. She didn't know how long Xiaochen would cultivate. She planned to return to the dustless residence first. After all, she couldn't wait here. She slowly walked out of the Sword Chi room. Just as Qin Shuru arrived at the entrance of the Sword Chi room, the numerous disciples of Xiao Lu's faction gathered here one after another with infatuated expressions. Qin Shuru, they all knew the identity of Qin Shuru. Such a great beauty naturally had a great reputation in the Tianjian Peak. At the same time, they not only knew the identity of Qin Shuru, but also knew that Qin Shuru was Xiaochen's wife, and that the two had already gotten married in the Dongyang region. After a moment of infatuation, a disciple suddenly said, "Qin Shuru is Xiaochen's wife. If we take Qin Shuru to our bed, what do you think the disciples of the Zhengshuan faction will do?" Some people already had evil thoughts towards Qin Shuru. A man wouldn't be able to resist such a great beauty. Hearing this disciple's words, the other disciples immediately became excited. Yes, the disciples of the two factions were constantly fighting, and this matter was secretly incited by Lord Xiaolu. As a result, even if they did something to Qin Shuru, Lord Xiaolu would be responsible for it. They didn't need to bear any responsibility, and they could also ruthlessly attack the Zhengxuan faction. In addition, they could kiss the beauty of the goddess of their dreams. It was killing 3 birds with 1 stone. Without any hesitation, the lustful crowd directly blocked Qin Shuru's path. The person in the lead looked at Qin Shuru with a lewd smile and said, "Junior sister Shui Ro, where are you in such a hurry to go? I have something to trouble you to come with me." The beastly desire in his heart was not concealed in the slightest. Seeing this, Qin Shuru coldly spat out a word. Scram. These guys made him feel disgusted. Except for Xiaochen, Qin Shuru was cold to everyone. But after hearing this, the disciples of Xiaolu's faction had no intention of leaving. Instead, they had already surrounded Qin Shuru. The person who spoke before spoke again. Junior sister's temper is really fiery. However, it's not up to you today. You have to go whether you want to or not. If you don't want to, then senior brother can only use force. At that time, if I offend the beauty, junior sister, don't blame senior brother for being rough. It was obvious that they were going to forcibly take Qin Shuru away today. Even if they didn't wait for Xiaochen, they could wait for Qin Shuru. At the thought of having a chance to kiss Qin Shuru, the excitement in everyone's hearts had long been unable to be suppressed. The coldness had already begun to spread. In the face of such frivolous ridicule, Qin Shuru was completely enraged. Extreme coldness constantly emitted from his body. At the same time, an angry roar sounded from not far away. You're all courting death. I'd like to see who has the ability to take Qin Shuru away today. Accompanied by this voice, Qin Heng and Qi Yan strode over with a group of Zhengxuan faction disciples. The angry roar just now had come from Qi Yan. You're tuning into the Mythic Realms YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.